At 3:57 on Tuesday morning, Ruth Bell saw the first person standing beneath the dead marquee of the Marlowe Theater. By the time she reached the bakery, she counted 11 more. They were bundled in coats along the sidewalk, shoulders raised against the March cold. Earl Parsons had brought his folding fishing chair. Two women in hospital scrubs were sharing a silver thermos. A man Ruth recognized from the tire shop stood with his hands buried in his coveralls, staring straight through the bakery window. Ruth stopped across the street with her key between her fingers. The kitchen had been dark since midnight. The display cases were empty. A handwritten sign on the door said, "Open at 5, same as it had for 26 years. Nobody lined up at 4 in the morning for an empty bakery unless they wanted something besides bread. Then Earl spotted her. "There she is," he called. Every face turned. Ruth's first thought was that Paige had done more than write that terrible sentence. Her second was that she should have put on lipstick. She crossed Main Street while the traffic light changed for no one. Earl struggled out of his chair. "Morning, Ruth. What are you all doing here?" "Waiting." "I can see that." One of the nurses lifted her phone. On the screen was Paige's photograph of Ruth's kitchen floor, enlarged until a hairline crack looked like the San Andreas Fault. Ruth slid the key into the lock. "If you came to inspect under my work tables, you'll have to take a number." The nurse lowered the phone. "We came to buy you out." Ruth looked at the line again. Behind Earl, more headlights were turning onto Main Street. 10 hours earlier, Paige Bell had passed the mashed potatoes to Ruth and said, "I just don't understand why you would spend that kind of money without talking to us." The U.S. had been the first irritation. Ruth had bought the potatoes, peeled them, boiled them, mashed them with butter and warm milk, and carried the bowl to her own dining room table. Daniel and Paige had arrived 17 minutes late with a bottle of wine Ruth didn't like, and had immediately begun speaking in the careful voices people used around someone holding a weapon or a bad opinion. "It's my roof," Ruth had said. Daniel rubbed the place above his left eyebrow. He had done that since college whenever he wanted the world to become less specific. "Of course it is. And it was leaking." "We know, Mom." Water came through over the dry storage room. I put down 2 stock pots and Walter's old minnow bucket. That seemed like a discussion between me and the roofer. Paige set the potato bowl down harder than necessary. She was 40, small and polished, with pale hair cut at her jaw, and the posture of someone perpetually waiting for a photographer. She could walk into a cluttered room and identify the 3 objects making it feel hopeless. Ruth admired that talent when Paige used it on other people's houses. $12,000, Paige said. 11.8. "Oh, well. Precision matters when you're scolding somebody." Daniel tried a smile. It did not survive contact with either woman. The dining room still held Walter's tall walnut cabinet, though Paige had once suggested moving it because it made the room visually heavy. Walter had been visually heavy too, especially after pie, and Ruth had kept him for 43 years. Daniel reached for the gravy. "All we're saying is, there was an offer on the table." There was a conversation in a parking lot. Mr. Kessler sent a letter. He sent a letter saying he'd like to talk. That's how offers start. That's how conversations start, too. Paige's fork clicked against her plate. The number he mentioned was more than fair. Ruth looked at Daniel. "You told her the number?" He stopped moving. There it was, not a catastrophe. Just a small private fact lifted from Ruth's hand and placed in Paige's, as if everything Ruth owned would eventually pass that way, and they might as well begin sorting. Daniel cleared his throat. "I didn't realize it was confidential." "It wasn't. It was mine. Mom." Ruth cut into her meatloaf. The center was pinker than she wanted. Walter had always mixed it because her hands grew too warm and made the texture dense. 14 months without him, and she still found fresh ways to be annoyed at the dead. Paige leaned forward. "You could buy a beautiful condo near us. No stairs, no boilers, no getting up in the middle of the night. I get up at 2:40. That's the middle of the night, not if you're making bread. You could travel." "Where?" Paige blinked. "I'm serious," Ruth said. "Where do you see me traveling?" "There are tours, cruises. I get seasick in the bathtub." Daniel laughed before he could stop himself. Paige looked at him, and the laugh turned into a cough. Ruth softened despite herself. Daniel looked tired. He had Walter's broad hands, but none of his comfort with silence. His shirt cuff had a smear of blue ink near the button. For one irrational second, she wanted to wet her thumb and rub it off. Then Paige said, "This isn't funny." That building is swallowing your money. That building earns my money. Not enough to justify what it needs. You've studied my books? No, because you won't show Daniel. I have an accountant. You have Mr. Pritchard, who is 76 and still uses a fax machine. He also uses math. Daniel put down his fork. Can we lower the temperature here? The meatloaf could use it, Ruth said. Nobody laughed that time. Paige took a breath through her nose. She did that before saying things she wanted, credited as reasonable. I was in the kitchen on Sunday. The floor tiles are cracked. There's rust under the utility sink. The pipe behind the oven looks prehistoric, and you keep using that wooden work table even though it can't possibly be properly sanitized. Ruth's face warmed. What were you doing behind the oven? I dropped my earring. You took pictures while you were looking? Paige's eyes shifted barely. That was when Ruth understood she had not wandered into an argument. The argument had been measured and photographed before it arrived. Daniel looked from one woman to the other. Pictures? I wanted you to see what she's dealing with. You could have asked me, Ruth said. You would have said it was fine. It is fine. It's old. So am I. Don't eat off me. Ruth, please. Paige almost never called her Ruth. The name landed with its shoes on. I grew up in a restaurant, Paige said. I know what happens when people keep patching things because they're emotionally attached. My father patched the freezer handle with duct tape for 5 years. One morning, we lost everything inside it. This is not your father's diner. No, his diner had stainless steel, Daniel said. Paige, too late and too softly. Paige looked at him, then back at Ruth. Her cheeks had gone bright beneath her makeup. You're pouring money into an unsanitary old bakery because you can't admit you can't manage it anymore. The refrigerator motor hummed in the kitchen. Ruth waited for Daniel. He stared at Paige. That's not fair. 3 words, carefully chosen. Not, that isn't true. Not, my mother keeps that place cleaner than anyone I know. That's not fair, as if Paige's case had merit, but her presentation needed work. Ruth folded her napkin and laid it beside her plate. Well, she said, who wants coffee? The dinner ended 13 minutes later. Daniel tried to stay behind and help with dishes, but Ruth told him she had a system. She did have a system. The system was to let the plate soak until her hands stopped shaking. At 9:30, she drove back to Bell's Bakery. She told herself she had forgotten to check the pilot light. Then she checked it 3 times and began pulling equipment from the walls. The bakery after hours was a different country. Without the ovens breathing and the front bell chiming, every old thing announced itself. The clock above the office door ticked too loudly. The fluorescent tube near the mixer flickered. The maple table bore pale crescents from decades of bench scrapers, and the edges had gone smooth beneath Ruth's palms. She crouched beside the utility sink with a scrub brush and attacked the rust stain. It was only mineral residue from a slow drip Walter had meant to fix. She knew that. She also knew Paige's camera did not care. At 10:12, Marlene Pike called. You awake? I run a bakery. That is not an answer. Have you seen the town, Paige? Ruth sat back on her heels. What town, Paige? Oh, hell. Marlene. You need to look before somebody else calls you. Ruth disliked social media, on principle and in practice. Daniel had created an account for the bakery years ago, and Ruth had forgotten the password often enough that the machine had begun treating her like an intruder. Marlene texted a link. The post began with a photograph of Bell's front window beneath a question from the Marlowe Business Association. What would you like to see preserved as downtown grows? There were comments about the theater marquee, the sycamores near the courthouse, and the brass mail slots in the old post office. Halfway down, Paige had written 6 sentences. Nostalgia is wonderful, but it shouldn't prevent honest conversations about health, safety, and responsible development. Some buildings have been patched far past their useful lives. Marlowe deserves clean, modern businesses, not places protected from scrutiny just because they've been here a long time. Beneath it were 3 photographs. Ruth enlarged the first and saw her cracked tile. The second showed the pipe. The third showed a drift of flour beneath the maple table, illuminated by Paige's flash so each white speck stood out. Ruth stared at it. Sunday afternoon. She had been rolling biscuit dough when Daniel and Paige arrived early. The flour had been swept before closing, as it was every day. Paige knew that. She had eaten one of those biscuits at Ruth's kitchen counter while they were still hot. Say something, Marlene demanded through the phone. If I say what I'm thinking, you'll have to visit me through glass. I already replied. Ruth closed her eyes. What did you say? That I ate 2 lemon bars from Bell's last week, and the only danger was my pants not buttoning. Marlene, people liked it. Delete it. I will not. Ruth scrolled. The argument was spreading beneath Paige's comment. Someone asked whether Bell's had failed an inspection. Someone else said Ruth's kitchen was cleaner than most operating rooms. A man Ruth did not know wrote that old people always confused habit with quality. That one hurt in a place Paige's words had missed. Ruth stood too quickly and grabbed the sink. I have to work, she said. At 10:30? At every 30. Want me to come? No. The answer came sharp enough to silence them both. Ruth lowered her voice. No, honey. Go to bed. She cleaned until her shoulders burned. She scrubbed the grout with a toothbrush, emptied every flour bin, washed the bins, dried them, and filled them again. At midnight, she found herself polishing the underside of a shelf no customer had ever seen. She stopped with the rag in her hand. Walter would have told her she was being foolish. Then he would have polished the other shelf. The grief of that nearly folded her. Instead, Ruth tied on a fresh apron and began the sour cream twists. Butter into flour, yeast into warm milk. The movement steadied her because they did not ask who was right. Dough told the truth without enjoying it. By 3:15, she had 6 loaves proofing, 4 trays of twists, and blackberry filling cooling near the window. It was less than half her usual Tuesday production. She had spent too long cleaning what was already clean. At 3:40, her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Mom, I'm sorry. Paige shouldn't have posted those photos. I'll call first thing. Ruth read it twice. He was sorry Paige had posted the photos. Not that she had taken them. Not that he had sat at Ruth's table and let his wife reduce 41 years of work to a dirty floor. Ruth slipped the phone into her apron pocket and went out to unlock the front door. Now, with the line stretching past the insurance office and the first tray of twists still 20 minutes from done, she faced 32 customers and no idea what promise they believed she had made. Earl folded his chair. You going to let us freeze? I don't open until 5. It's 4:03. Then you've got 57 minutes to reconsider your life. The nurse with the silver thermos grinned. Someone farther back laughed. Ruth opened the door. Warm yeast and cinnamon drifted from the kitchen into the cold street. The laughter stopped. Faces lifted toward the scent. Ruth looked down the line once more, then at Paige's photographs glowing on the 3 different phones. All right, she said. You can come inside, but nobody buys anything until it's baked, and if a single one of you gets sentimental in my store, coffee is $3 extra. Earl stepped through first and wiped his boots so aggressively on the mat that he nearly lost his balance. Careful, Ruth said. I'm not filling out paperwork because you tried to make a point with your shoes. I am not making a point. You brought a chair. I have knees. The 2 nurses came in behind him, followed by the tire shop man and a woman from the county clerk's office whose name Ruth could never remember until she saw it written on a check. Cold air rolled through the doorway with them. Within minutes, every chair was occupied and customers were standing 2 deep along the counter. They all looked at Ruth. Ruth looked back. You understand. I don't have food yet. We can wait, Earl said. This isn't a bus station. The younger nurse raised her thermos. I brought enough coffee to survive radiology. I'm prepared. Ruth turned on the lights over the display cases. The glass gleamed without so much as a thumbprint. She had cleaned those cases at 11:30, furious with Paige, though the cases had not appeared in any photograph. If you're staying, make yourselves useful, she said. Somebody flip that sign to open. Earl, stack those newspapers before they slide onto the floor. And whoever parked the red Buick in front of the hydrant, the fire department will not care about your feelings. A man near the door quietly went outside. That helped. Work always made a crowd less dangerous. Ruth returned to the kitchen. The twists had risen beautifully despite the draft. She brushed them with butter and slid 2 trays into the deck oven, then checked the blackberry filling. The kitchen door opened behind her. No, she said without turning. Marlene came in anyway, wearing purple sweatpants beneath her camel coat and lipstick the color of a stop sign. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to say, I told you so. Then hug me while I'm holding something hot. I was going to ask where you keep the extra coffee cups. Front cabinet, bottom shelf. I told you so. Ruth pointed a butter brush at her. Marlene put up both hands. No hugging. They had known each other for 34 years, since Marlene had walked into Bell's after a doctor's appointment, ordered a whole coconut cake, and eaten one slice at a back table without removing her sunglasses. Ruth never asked what the doctor had said. Marlene eventually told her anyway, along with everything else she had thought since 1979. Now she peered through the round window in the kitchen door. You've got people to the corner. They're bored. At 4 in the morning, especially at 4 in the morning, they're here for you. They're here because the town page gave them something to be mad about before breakfast. Marlene's expression changed. Not pity exactly, but close enough that Ruth turned toward the oven. Coffee cups, Ruth reminded her. Yes, ma'am, and charge them. You're charging people who came to defend you? I'm not a monument, Marlene. I'm a business. Marlene gave a small salute and left. At 4:30, the first twists came out burnished and fragrant, with sugar bubbling at the edges. A sound traveled through the front room. Not applause, thank God, but a collective murmur that embarrassed Ruth almost as much. She carried out the tray. No pushing. There are 16. Earl stepped forward with his wallet open. I'll take 6. You live alone. I have plans. You'll take 2. You can't ration pastry in America. I can in my bakery. The nurse from radiology bought 2. The county clerk bought 4 and added a loaf she would have to return for. People began placing orders for things Ruth had not made. Pecan rolls, rye bread, almond cookies, 3 dozen Parker House rolls for Thursday. Marlene found the order pad under the register and started writing. Stop that, Ruth said. They're orders. They're wishes. Orders require dates and deposits. Marlene added columns. The bell above the door kept ringing. Every opening brought in more cold and another customer. Some were familiar enough that Ruth knew their standing orders. Others had not entered bells in years. Steve Harlan, who had complained in 2018 that her apple pie contained too much apple, bought 2. You still packing them so full? He asked. Yes, he sighed. Give me the bigger one. A woman from the bank asked if Ruth remembered the rolls she had made for her first wedding. Lemon glaze, Ruth said. The woman smiled. You remember? You returned the cake stand with a cigarette burn. The smile weakened. That may have been my sister. It had your initials carved beside it. 2 dozen rolls, please. At 5:10, the blackberry hand pies came out. Ruth glazed them while they were too warm and the icing ran in thin white rivers, exactly the way Walter had liked. She caught herself setting aside the largest one for him. Her hand stopped. For a moment, the kitchen tilted into silence, though the front room was roaring. Walter's chipped green mug still hung from the hook beside the sink. She had not used it since the week he died. Dust had settled in the bottom. Ruth put the hand pie back on the tray. When she carried it out, Daniel was standing just inside the door. He wore yesterday's blue shirt under his winter coat. The ink smear remained on the cuff. His hair was damp on one side, and he looked as though he had left his house before deciding what to say. The room noticed him. That was the ugliness of a small town. People could turn their heads half an inch and make it feel like a trial. Daniel stepped toward the counter. Mom, we're out of twists. I didn't come for twists. Then you're blocking the people who did. The tire shop man studied the pastry case with great concentration. Daniel lowered his voice. Can I help? I have help. From behind the register, Marlene waved both hands. Ruth saw the hurt cross his face, quick and private. It did not satisfy her the way she had imagined it might. The sink is full, she said. You know where the aprons are? Daniel nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. The room began breathing again. By 6, there were more orders than baked goods. Ruth found herself moving faster, which made her angry because the bakery had trained her better than that. Speed invited mistakes. She forgot salt once in 1996, and still remembered the gray, disappointed faces of those loaves. She mixed another batch of twists in the old Hobart. The motor gave its familiar low growl. Walter used to lay one hand on its dented metal housing and call it Old Ironsides. Ruth had stopped doing that because talking to machinery felt silly when no one else was there to hear. Daniel washed sheet pans at the 3-compartment sink. His shoulders filled Walter's old apron oddly. Walter had tied the strings beneath his belly. Daniel tied them in front. Mom, he said over the water. Not now. I didn't know she took those pictures. You knew she had them at dinner. Then, I found out then. And you said? I asked her not to post anything. Ruth stopped measuring flour. So, she posted them after you asked. Daniel rinsed a pan. Yes. Did you ask her to take them down? This morning. What did she say? His hesitation was shorter than it had been at dinner, but Ruth caught it. She said taking them down now would make it look like she'd lied. She did lie. She thinks the photos show a real problem. Do you? The faucet ran between them. Daniel shut it off. His hands were red from the hot water. I think you're working in a building that needs more repairs than you tell me. That isn't what I asked. No, I don't think your bakery is dirty. Ruth scooped flour into the mixer. Then say that, where she said the opposite. He flinched. Publicly? Does truth spoil in daylight? It'll turn into a fight. It is a fight. I just seem to be the last person you wanted to inform. The mixer growled as Ruth lowered the hook. Daniel dried his hands on his apron. Paige is worried, he said. Paige is photographed. Her parents lost everything in that diner. I know. You know the summary. You don't know what it was like for her, and she knows what this is like for me. Daniel looked toward the front room. Marlene was calling out order totals like an auctioneer. No, he admitted. It was the first useful thing he had said. Ruth set the timer. Take those clean trays to Marlene. He carried them out without argument. At 6:20, a local radio host arrived and asked Ruth if she would speak on air. She refused. At 6:30, someone tried to start a chant, and Earl told him to shut up because Ruth could hear everything through the kitchen door. At 6:45, a florist delivered a bouquet with no card. Ruth put it in a plastic pitcher and charged the florist for 2 loaves. The line finally shortened after 7. Ruth sold the last hand pie to the younger nurse, who had circled back after her shift ended. I already had one, the nurse confessed. Then you know better. My mother wants to come tomorrow. Your mother has a phone. She can call like a civilized person. She says you never answer. I'm baking. The nurse smiled, paid, and left, with the final white paper bag. At 7:15, Ruth locked the front door and turned the sign to closed. People were still peering through the glass, but the cases were bare, except for sugar and crumbs. Marlene lifted the order pad. How many Parker House rolls can you make by Thursday? Apparently none, because you've promised more than exist in Ohio. I took deposits. Ruth stared at her. You told me to. I told you orders require deposits. I did not tell you to sell the future. It was going very fast. Daniel came from the kitchen carrying a plastic tub of dirty utensils. His shirt was damp at the collar. How bad? He asked. Marlene began counting pages. 42 orders, maybe 43. One lady's handwriting looks like she wants 6 dozen bran muffins or sex lessons. Ruth took the pad. The numbers were absurd. 6 loaves here, 4 dozen rolls there, a retirement luncheon, an office breakfast, 3 birthday cakes. Customers had paid enough deposits to make refusing complicated and fulfilling them worse. Her back ached. Her right thumb had begun to throb at the joint. She had been awake nearly 29 hours. Still, beneath the exhaustion, something bright and reckless stirred. The town had seen Paige's photographs and chosen Ruth. She hated needing the choice. She could not deny what it felt like. Daniel leaned against the counter. You can't do all that alone. I'm aware. I can come before work tomorrow. You have a job. So do you. Marlene looked between them and suddenly became interested in wiping the register. Ruth turned the order pad to the next blank page. Wednesday is usually slow. If I start the rolls tonight, Daniel said. Not your business. It becomes my business when you haven't slept. Ruth looked at him. That sentence right there, that is the problem. What sentence? The one where loving me makes my life yours. Daniel's mouth closed. From the kitchen came a metallic knock, followed by a low electrical hum. Ruth knew that sound. She reached the mixer as the motor gave a hard shudder. The dough hook stopped halfway through a turn. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the housing of old Ironsides. Daniel pulled the plug. The silence afterward was enormous. Marlene appeared in the doorway with the order pad pressed to her chest. Ruth put her palm against the mixer's warm metal side. On the front counter, 42 paid promises waited in Marlene's handwriting. In the kitchen, every loaf began with a machine that had just decided it was done. Don't touch it again, Daniel said. Ruth kept her palm on the mixer. I wasn't going to. You were looking at the plug. I can look at anything I please. The smoke means no. The smoke means it overheated. The smoke means smoke. Marlene leaned around the doorway. I'm with Daniel on this one. Nobody asked you. I'm still with him. Ruth removed her hand. The metal was warmer than it should have been, but not hot. The dough sat in the bowl, half mixed, shaggy with streaks of butter. 40 pounds of ingredients were waiting for the hook to complete a job Ruth's shoulders could not. Walter would have known whom to call. The thought irritated her because Walter had been dead long enough to stop being in charge of appliance repair, yet every broken thing still seemed to ask for him first. "Get Cal Blevins," Ruth said. Daniel took out his phone. "Not the number online. That goes to his nephew in Dayton, who will tell you commercial equipment requires an assessment. Cal's home number is on the clipboard beside the desk." Daniel found the clipboard. Marlene came farther into the kitchen. "What do we tell people? That the mixer is broken. I mean about the orders. We tell them nothing yet. Some are for tomorrow. Then we have all day." Daniel returned with the number. It went to voicemail. He sleeps late. It's 7:30 in the morning. He repairs bars. His morning starts around noon. Ruth lifted the dough hook and tested the mass with her fingers. Underworked, but salvageable. She could divide it and knead portions by hand. She had done that when she and Walter first opened, though at 27 she had owned a different spine. Daniel saw her expression. "No, would you stop saying that in my kitchen? You can't hand knead 40 orders. This isn't 40 orders. This is one batch. And then what? Then there's another, and another. That is generally how baking works." He stepped beside the bowl and reached for the dough. Ruth slapped his hand away. "I was going to help. You don't know how. It's dough, not a heart transplant. That attitude is why your dinner rolls in college could have been used in landscaping." Marlene covered a smile. Daniel looked at the bowl. "Show me." Ruth almost refused. Teaching took longer than doing, especially when the student was her son, and therefore had a lifelong talent for making instruction sound like criticism. But her thumb pulsed when she flexed it. She cut the dough into 3 pieces and dropped the first onto the maple table. "Push with the heel of your hand. Fold. Quarter turn. Don't tear it." Daniel copied her. His first push mashed the dough flat. "You're punishing it. I'm pushing. You're angry. I'm not angry at the dough. The dough doesn't know that," Marlene said. "I'm going to make coffee before this turns into therapy." The dough resisted Daniel, then began to smooth under his hands. Ruth worked beside him, matching the old rhythm. Push, fold, turn. Her shoulders loosened despite the ache. Walter had taught Daniel the same motion one summer when Daniel was 19. He had lasted 4 mornings, then taken a job loading landscape stone because it started at 7 and paid 50 cents more. Ruth had pretended not to mind. Walter said the bakery should be available to their son, not wrapped around his ankle. Now Daniel glanced at her hands and adjusted his pressure. "Like that?" he asked. "Better." It was not praise exactly, but he heard it. By 8:15, the salvaged dough was proofing. Ruth's phone had collected 19 missed calls, 7 messages, and 1 photograph from a woman who had placed her Bell's bakery bag beside an American flag. "Why is my hand pie patriotic?" Ruth asked. Marlene peered over her shoulder. "People are emotional. About pastry, about you. That's worse." The phone rang again. Ruth answered with more force than necessary. "Bell's. A man asked if she shipped to Arizona." "No." "What about Indiana?" "No, I'm only 2 hours away. Then Indiana has roads." She hung up. Marlene was staring at her. "What?" "You could have taken his information." "I don't ship." "You could." "I could also juggle knives. We're not expanding the business plan before breakfast." Daniel wiped flour from his forearms. "Do you have a business plan?" "I had a mixer." Cal Blevins called at 9:12. He arrived 40 minutes later, wearing red suspenders over a thermal shirt and carrying a battered toolbox. He listened to old Ironsides with the solemnity of a doctor examining a former mayor. "You ran her hard," he said. "She has been run harder. She's also older than your son." Daniel, sweeping near the proofer, looked up. "Why am I involved?" Cal removed the housing panel. Reference point. He shone a light inside, grunted, and asked Ruth to hand him a screwdriver already in his hand. After 20 minutes, he straightened. Motor windings burned. Probably been cooking itself a while. Bearing has play too. "When can you fix it? If I rebuild? Maybe Friday, more likely Monday." Ruth looked toward the order pad. Daniel asked, "What about replacing it? New machine this size, lead time could be weeks. Used one, you might get lucky." "How much?" Cal named a range that made Marlene stop rustling paper. Ruth folded her arms. "Rebuild it. I'll need to pull the motor. Do it." Cal looked at the dough on the table, the stacked trays, and the bare display cases. You got a backup? I have hands. He looked at those too. Those got a lead time? Ruth did not answer. By 10:30, Old Ironside stood open and hollow, its motor carried away in Cal's truck. The empty housing seemed indecent. Ruth draped a clean towel over it. Marlene had begun calling customers with Wednesday orders, offering refunds or later pickup. Most refused refunds. One woman offered to pay double if Ruth would move her order ahead of everyone else's. Tell her triple, Ruth said. Marlene stared. I'm joking. You need a different face when you do that. A knock sounded at the back door. Ruth expected Cal returning for a forgotten tool. Instead, she found a tall man holding 2 cardboard cups and a white paper sack. He wore a dark wool cap over hair threaded with gray, and a denim jacket dusted with flour at one elbow. His face was narrow, with tired eyes, and a mustache that had made a firm commitment to the 1980s. Mrs. Bell? Depends. Luis Mendoza. We met at the Miller Milling demonstration in Columbus, the year the salesman nearly lost a thumb. Ruth remembered him then. He had been pastry chef at the Lakeview Hotel, quietly correcting the salesman's hydration percentages from the back row. You told him laminated dough wasn't a personality, she said. Luis smiled. He was very proud of it. What can I do for you? I brought coffee. I sell coffee. You're closed. He lifted the sack. And breakfast. I sell that too. Not today, according to the sign. Ruth looked past him. A sheet of printer paper had been taped to the front window. Sold out. Please call ahead. Marlene's handwriting. Luis's smile faded. I saw the post. If you came to inspect, you're late. We've already removed the motor. I came because I heard you might need a baker. Ruth glanced at Marlene, who was suddenly pressing buttons on the register without looking up. You heard wrong. Luis held out one of the cups. Then take the coffee and I'll go. What's in the bag? Egg sandwiches? From the gas station, so I make no promises. Her stomach tightened at the smell. She had not eaten since one bite of pink meatloaf. Ruth accepted the cup, but not the sack. Who told you? Marlene called my sister. Marlene remained very busy with the register. Luis continued. My sister called me because she thinks a man without a job will evaporate if not given errands. Ruth studied him. You left Lakeview. New owners closed the restaurant. They kept banquets, brought in frozen desserts, and told me I was overqualified. That means expensive. That's what I said. And you're looking for work. I'm looking for the right work. This is temporary. All work is. She disliked that answer because Walter would have liked it. Can you work a bench without a mixer? Luis glanced at the portions of dough resting under towels. Depends. Are we making bread or proving something? Marlene made a choking sound. Ruth took a sip of coffee. It was terrible. Both, she said. Wash your hands. Luis removed his jacket and cap, revealing a clean white t-shirt and the stooped shoulders of someone who had spent decades leaning over stainless steel. He washed to the elbows without being told, found an apron, and tied it correctly. He did not ask for instructions until he had read every line on the order pad. This can't all be done, he said. Ruth's dislike of him returned immediately. It can, not well. We don't sell well, we sell good. Then less can be done. Daniel stopped sweeping. Ruth set down her coffee. You have been employed here for 40 seconds. I'm not employed. You told me to wash, and now I'm telling you the orders are paid. Luis studied the list. Which customer matters most? All of them. Then which deadline moves? None. He nodded once, as if she had confirmed something for him, and began sorting the order pages by pickup time. Ruth watched him make 3 piles. What are you doing? Finding the lie? Excuse me, every emergency has a lie inside it. Usually, everything is equally urgent. Daniel leaned his broom against the wall. I like him. You're free to take him home. Luis tapped the first page. These Parker House rolls are for Thursday. We can mix them in smaller batches tomorrow if your refrigerator has space. Cakes don't need the big mixer if we change the method. Rye does. Cancel the rye. I have never canceled bread because a machine got moody. Then make bad rye. Ruth stared at him. He met her eyes without aggression and without backing away. Marlene whispered to Daniel, $10 on Ruth. I can hear you, Ruth said. Luis pushed the order pad toward her. Your name is on every bag. That means you decide what it is worth. The sentence reached her where advice could not. Ruth looked at the orders again. 3 dozen rye loaves for a corporate luncheon. The customer had last ordered from Bell's 11 months earlier and had argued over a $5 delivery charge. "Call the Rye," she told Marlene. "Refund the deposit." Marlene picked up the phone. Daniel's cell buzzed on the maple table. He glanced at the screen, and his face tightened. "Paige?" Ruth asked. He turned the phone face down. That answered her. "Go home," Ruth said. "I can stay. Go talk to your wife. She doesn't want to talk. Then listen while she doesn't." Daniel untied Walter's apron. At the back door, he paused. "I'll come tomorrow morning." Ruth began to tell him not to. Instead, she said, 4 o'clock. After he left, she found flour on the table where his phone had been. Beneath it, in the clean wood, was a damp rectangular mark. Luis stood at the sink measuring warm water. "Your son bakes better than he sweeps. He doesn't bake. He needed that batch with supervision. Then he bakes." Ruth gathered the order pages into a straighter stack. Through the window, she could see Daniel sitting in his car with both hands on the steering wheel, not going anywhere yet. "Not every useful thing needs a new name," she said. Louise sprinkled yeast over the water. "Sometimes the old name is the problem." Ruth ignored that because yeast had begun foaming in the bowl, and there were only so many philosophical conversations a person should have before lunch. Luis divided the work without asking permission. He gave Ruth the cake orders, took the rolls for himself, and assigned Marlene to packaging only after making her promise not to accept another deposit. "What if it's a small order?" Marlene asked. "No." "What if it's for a funeral?" Luis paused. "How dead?" Ruth looked at him. "That was a joke," he said. "You need a different face when you do that." Marlene laughed so hard she had to sit down. They worked with the small countertop mixer Ruth used for frostings and fillings, a cream-colored machine Walter had bought secondhand from a church kitchen. It could handle one cake at a time, but anything heavier made it walk across the counter. Luis tucked a folded dish towel beneath its feet and watched it as though supervising an unreliable employee. For the rolls, they mixed in bus tubs and kneaded at the maple table. Luis's hands were slower than Daniel's, but wasted no motion. He folded the dough inward, turned it, and pressed with the steady force of a tide. Ruth found herself watching. "You're adding flour too early," she said. He stopped. "I haven't added any. You were thinking about it? I apologize for my thoughts. Dough is supposed to be tacky, I know. People panic when it sticks. I am calm. You don't look calm. This is my face." She almost smiled, which annoyed her. At noon, Marlene went home to change clothes and returned wearing a sweater with sequins across the chest. She brought ham sandwiches, a bag of potato chips, and 3 copies of the Marlow Gazette. Ruth saw her own name above the fold. "No, I didn't write it. Then why did you buy 3? One to read, one to save, and one in case the first one gets gravy on it." Ruth snatched the top paper. The photograph showed the line outside Bell's before dawn, with Earl in his fishing chair and Ruth crossing the street in her flour-dusted coat. She looked small beneath the theater marquee, not fragile, exactly. Outnumbered. The headline read, "Marlow rallies around beloved bakery." "Beloved," Ruth said. "That's a word they use when they expect you to die soon." Luis kept shaping rolls. Marlene unfolded the paper. "It says you sold out in 2 hours. I started selling before I opened. They didn't include that. They should print a correction." The article quoted 3 customers and a downtown shop owner. It mentioned concerns about the bakery's condition, but said no official complaint had been made. Paige was not named. Her comment was described as a social media debate. Ruth should have been relieved. Instead, the softened language made her furious. A debate sounded like 2 people at podiums. Paige had photographed flour beneath Ruth's table, eaten the biscuit made above it, and then called the room unsanitary. Marlene turned the page. "Oh, they got a nice picture of the hand pies. Throw it away. I paid $1.25 for this. Then wrap fish in it. We live in Ohio. Find a fish." Luis reached for another piece of dough. "The article will bring more people tomorrow. We'll be ready." "No, we won't." Ruth pressed the newspaper flat on the counter. "You have a habit of saying discouraging things. I worked at a hotel. Encouragement was not in my job description. What was? Making 800 desserts for people who blamed the cake when they hated the wedding." Marlene handed him a sandwich. "Why did you leave?" "The new owners decided cheesecake could arrive on a truck frozen." "That should be illegal." "It's legal, just sad." Ruth looked at the rolls lined in neat rows. They let you go. They called it restructuring. When? 6 weeks ago. And you haven't found anything since? Luis wiped flour from his hands before opening the sandwich. I have found several things. None of them found me affordable. The answer was light, but his jaw tightened at the last word. Ruth knew what it was to have years of skill treated as an expensive inconvenience. You're not working here for free, she said. I assumed the sandwich was my compensation. It's not even a good sandwich. I wasn't going to complain. How much were you making at Lakeview? He told her. Ruth nearly dropped the paper. Were you baking in gold? I supervised 12 people. I don't have 12 people. You have Marlene. I heard that, Marlene said through a mouthful of chips. Ruth named an hourly rate lower than his old pay, but higher than she could comfortably sustain. Luis considered it. For today? For today. Agreed. He put out his hand. His palm was floured. Ruth shook it anyway. By 3, the bakery smelled of yeast, browned butter, and hot sugar. The sound of people knocking on the locked front door became so regular that Ruth stopped looking up. Marlene had taped a second sign beneath, "Sold out, pickups only." Someone added a heart in red marker. Ruth erased it. At 4:15, Ruth frosted the wrong cake. It was not a disaster. Both were 8-inch rounds. One needed chocolate icing and one needed lemon. She spread chocolate over the first layer before realizing the cake beneath it was pale and scented with zest. She stared down at the dark spiral. Her mind had performed the same movements it had performed thousands of times. Knife, icing, turn the stand. The mistake sat in front of her, undeniable. Luis glanced over. "Don't," she said. "I didn't say anything. You made a face. This is my face. I know what your face looks like now." He came closer and tasted a crumb from the cake's trimmed edge. Then he dipped the tip of a clean spoon into the chocolate. "What are you doing? Checking if the mistake tastes good." "It doesn't matter. It matters to the cake." He tasted them together. "Not bad. It is not what she ordered." "No. We make the lemon again and sell this one tomorrow as chocolate citrus. I don't sell mistakes, then call it European." She gave him a look. Luis shrugged. "At the hotel, we called mistakes seasonal." Ruth wanted to throw the icing knife at him. Instead, a laugh escaped her, short and unwilling. It hurt her tired ribs. Marlene poked her head through the door. "What happened?" "Nothing," Ruth said. "We invented Europe," Luis said. At 5, Daniel arrived still wearing his office clothes and brushing a pair of new non-slip shoes in a cardboard box. "For you," he said. Ruth looked down at her bakery clogs. "What's wrong with mine? The soles are worn smooth. They're broken in. They're dangerous." "Did Paige tell you to buy those?" His mouth hardened. "No." "Then thank you." He appeared surprised enough that Ruth regretted how rarely the phrase must have occurred between them lately. She set the box beneath the desk. Daniel stared at it. "You could try them on. I could also finish this buttercream." Luis extended a floured hand. "Luis Mendoza, Daniel Bell. I taught your mother everything she knows." Ruth smacked Luis's hand with a towel. Daniel smiled. "You must be new." They put him to work folding boxes. He was terrible at it. Every carton bowed in the middle or refused to close. Marlene corrected him twice, then took over. "I have an MBA," Daniel said. "And yet," Marlene replied. At 6:30, while Ruth piped lemon buttercream onto the replacement cake, Daniel came to stand beside her. "I wrote something on the post," she kept piping. "What?" "That the bakery has always been clean. That Paige's pictures showed repairs you already knew about, not how the place is maintained." The buttercream ridge wavered. Ruth steadied her hand. "Did she agree?" "No." "Did you tell her first?" "Yes." "And?" "She said I was humiliating her to please you." Ruth set down the piping bag. "Are you?" "What?" "Trying to please me." Daniel thought about it. "Maybe a little." "That's not a good enough reason to pick a fight with your wife." "I didn't pick it. I waited too long to admit I was already in it." There was something of Walter in that answer, not the words, but the patient refusal to decorate them. Ruth turned the cake stand. "You left a gap." "Where?" She pointed to the border. "There." Daniel looked. "That's microscopic. People pay for the whole border." He picked up the piping bag. "Show me." Before she could, the phone rang. Marlene answered at the register. A moment later, her voice lost its cheer. Yes, Alma, I understand. Ruth knew the tone. She wiped her hands and took the receiver. Alma? Alma Hawkins owned the Granary Cafe near the courthouse. Bell's had supplied its sandwich rolls every Tuesday and Friday for 11 years. You didn't bring my order, Alma said. Ruth closed her eyes. The standing order. 6 dozen sesame rolls, due at 6 that morning. They had never been written on Marlene's pad because Ruth did not need to write down what she had done twice a week for 11 years. Alma, I'm sorry. This morning got away from me. I noticed. I can have them tomorrow. I needed them today. I know. I sent Curtis over at 8. There was a sign saying sold out and nobody answered the back door. They had been beside the smoking mixer. Ruth pictured Curtis knocking while everyone argued. I should have called. You should have delivered. The words were not cruel. That made them worse. Alma sighed. I had to buy packaged rolls at the supermarket. I'm switching suppliers, Ruth. 1 missed order in 11 years, 3 late ones since Walter died. This is the first missed one. Ruth looked at the crowded kitchen, at Louise shaping paid promises, at Daniel holding the piping bag, at the newspaper calling her beloved, beside 42 orders from people who might forget Bells again, once the town found something new to defend. Alma, give me Friday. I can't run my lunch service on memories. The line went quiet. Ruth's thumb throbbed around the receiver. No, she said. You can't. After they hung up, Marlene touched Ruth's arm. Ruth moved away before the touch could become comfort. Those rolls paid the electric bill, she said. Daniel set down the piping bag. We can get the account back. We? He did not answer. Ruth looked toward the front window, where the heart Marlene had drawn was still faintly visible despite the eraser. The town had lined up to prove Paige wrong. In the noise of being defended, Ruth had failed someone who had trusted her without making a spectacle of it. Finish the cakes, she said. Then everybody goes home. Louise looked at the remaining order sheets. What about tomorrow? Ruth reached for a clean mixing bowl. Tomorrow, she said, we stop acting surprised that it's coming. The new shoes stayed in their box beneath the desk, while Ruth worked in the old ones. At 2:45, she wrote the day's menu on the chalkboard, in letters large enough to disappoint people before they reached the counter. Beneath that, after a moment, she added, when it's gone, it's gone. The bakery was quiet except for the countertop mixer beating butter and the small sounds of Luis moving through the kitchen. He had arrived at 2:30 carrying his own knives in a canvas roll and a coffee from somewhere better than the gas station. Ruth had looked at the clock. I hired you for yesterday. You didn't fire me. I didn't hire you for today. You wrote 42 orders. 41. We canceled the rye. Luis hung his jacket on the hook beside Walter's old barn coat. Ruth stared at the 2 garments touching. Luis noticed and moved his jacket to the next hook. The rolls need shaping, he said. Ruth handed him an apron. At 3:58, Daniel came through the back door, wearing the non-slip shoes he had bought for Ruth. She looked at his feet. They're the wrong size for me, he said. You bought my size. I have your feet. That is a disturbing thing to say before sunrise. He tied on Walter's apron. They worked without discussing Paige. Daniel mixed cake batter with the countertop machine, while Louise shaped rolls and Ruth managed the ovens. Every surface had a purpose. Every order page was clipped in pickup sequence above the table. Marlene had drawn colored circles beside paid deposits, and Ruth had rewritten her more creative abbreviations into recognizable English. At 4:20, the bell at the front door rattled. We're not open, Ruth called. A face appeared against the glass. Tessa Ward had changed since Ruth last saw her, but not in the places Ruth recognized. She was thinner through the cheeks, her dark hair chopped to her chin instead of hanging down her back, and she wore a brown canvas coat with one torn pocket. Yet she still tilted her head before asking for something, the way she had at 21 when she wanted Saturday off, or had burned a tray and hoped charm might alter chemistry. Ruth opened the door 3 inches. We don't have anything yet. I'm not here to buy. That seems popular this week. Tessa glanced at the close sign. Can I come in? It's cold out there. Yes. That was an observation, not an invitation. Tessa gave a tired half smile. You haven't changed. People keep telling me I should. Ruth opened the door. Tessa stepped inside and wiped her boots. At least she remembered that. Her gaze moved over the empty cases, the new roof stain that had not yet been repainted, and the chalkboard. I saw the article, she said. Everybody saw the article. I wanted to check on you. You haven't checked on me in 3 years. Tessa looked toward the kitchen. The round window gave her a view of Luis's back and Daniel's elbows. I know. Ruth waited. Tessa had worked at Bell's for 9 years. She had started at the register, learned pastry, then become quick enough with pie dough that Walter called her Flash. When she announced she was opening a cafe in Columbus, Ruth had given her 2 spare sheet pans, a stack of recipes, and the name of a used equipment dealer. 6 months later, Ruth discovered Tessa's cafe was selling a sour cream twist nearly identical to Bell's under the name City Swirl. Ruth had not called her. Tessa had not called Ruth. The cafe closed the following year. You here for another recipe? Ruth asked. Tessa accepted the blow without flinching. No. Sheet pans? No. What then? A shift. From the kitchen, a pan clattered. Daniel had always been terrible at pretending not to listen. Ruth folded her arms. You have a job? I do prep at North Market 3 days a week and catering when they have it. So you have half a job. About that. And you want the other half. I thought you might need hands. Ruth looked through the round window. Luis had begun portioning dough faster than Daniel could grease pans. The mixer bowl was too small. The pickup list covered most of the wall. I have hands. You have Daniel. I can hear you, he called. Tessa's smile was brief. I remember his box folding. He has an MBA now. Did it help? No. Ruth should have sent her away. That would have been clean and emotionally satisfying for perhaps 10 minutes. Then Ruth would still have 41 orders and a right thumb that had swollen overnight. Wash to your elbows, she said. Your first hour is a test. Tessa removed her coat. What happens if I pass? You get a second hour. She washed, tied on an apron, and stepped to the table without asking where anything was. Her body remembered the room. She picked up a bench scraper from the same hook it had occupied years earlier and began dividing dough into 2-ounce pieces. Luis watched her for half a minute. You're fast. She's careless when she's fast, Ruth said. Tessa weighed the next 3 portions. Each landed exactly at 2 ounces. I got less careless, she said. That remains to be seen. At 5, Ruth opened the front door to another line, smaller than Tuesday's, but long enough to reach the insurance office. People came in carrying newspaper clippings and phones. Ruth pointed to the chalkboard before anyone could speak. No special orders means no special orders. A man in a hunting jacket asked if she could make 1 chocolate cake for his wife's birthday. No, it's her 60th. If she has made it 60 years, she can survive a grocery store cake. He bought 6 twists. The pace stayed manageable for 11 minutes. Then a woman ordered 10 loaves, and everyone behind her began calculating scarcity. Ruth limited bread to 2 loaves per customer. Earl objected on constitutional grounds. Marlene, who had arrived at 5:15 in a pink cardigan and managerial spirits, enforced the limit with the enthusiasm of a nightclub bouncer. At 6, the display case was half empty, but the pickup shelves were full. Tessa moved between register and kitchen without colliding with anyone. She remembered which customers wanted their rolls unglazed and which ones only believed they did. Ruth found herself relying on her before she had decided to forgive her. At 6:30, a woman Ruth barely knew placed a glass jar on the counter. A photograph of Bell's Bakery had been taped around it beneath red letters, Save Ruth's Legacy. Inside were folded bills and checks. Ruth stared at the jar. What is that? The woman smiled. Marlene organized it. Marlene, at the register, went still. We've already raised almost $2,000 online, the woman said. This is just for people who prefer cash. Online where? A fundraising page, for the mixer and the repairs. Ruth looked at Marlene. The room kept moving for another few seconds, people not yet aware that something had changed. Then the register drawer closed, and silence spread outward. Marlene, Ruth said, it was Earl's idea too. Earl was suddenly fascinated by a rack of cooling bread. You use my name to ask strangers for money? Not strangers, the town. There are people in Phoenix sending donations, the woman offered. Ruth turned to her. Why? The story got shared. The jar sat between them, transforming the counter into something Ruth did not recognize. She imagined people reading about the brave old widow and clicking a button because $5 was cheaper than wondering what happened to her. Give it back. The woman's smile faded. I'm sorry. Every dollar. Marlene came around the register. Ruth, the mixer alone, I know what the mixer costs. And the floor. The pipe. You just paid for the roof. I know what my building costs. People want to help. Then they can buy bread. They did. There isn't any left. Then they can come tomorrow. Marlene's face flushed. You cannot bake your way out of every problem. Ruth heard the truth in it and hated her for bringing it into the room. You had no right. I had every good intention. Those are not the same thing. I didn't make you sound helpless. Ruth picked up the jar and read the label again. Save Ruth's legacy. You made me sound finished. Marlene recoiled. The woman who had carried in the jar took a step back. Earl removed his cap. Daniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, flour across his chest. Tessa stopped beside the cooling rack. Even Luis had gone still. Marlene's voice dropped. That is not what I meant. It's what you printed. You're being proud. And you're being rude. I'm trying to keep this place open. I have kept this place open for 41 years. With Walter. The words came out of Marlene before she could catch them. Ruth felt them strike. Marlene's mouth opened. Ruth, I refund it. Let me change the wording. Refund it today. Some of the donations may take a few days to process. Then start now. Ruth pushed the jar toward her. One of the checks inside slid against the glass with a dry whisper. Marlene took it. Her eyes were wet, but her chin had hardened. Fine. She carried the jar into the office, collected her purse, and left through the back door without putting on her coat. Daniel moved toward Ruth. Don't, she said. She was trying to help. I know what she was trying. Do you? Ruth turned on him. If you want to follow her, follow her. He stayed where he was. The woman from the fundraiser murmured an apology and left. Conversations resumed in small, embarrassed pockets. The bell above the front door seemed painfully loud. Tessa approached the counter. Where do you want these? She held a tray of rolls as if nothing had happened. Ruth pointed to the second shelf. Tessa placed them there. You can say it, Ruth muttered. What? That I was awful. You were. Ruth looked at her. Tessa adjusted one bag so its label faced forward. Marlene was wrong to do it without asking. You were wrong to make her regret caring in front of a room full of people. You've been back 2 hours, 2.5. I can still fire you. Yes. Tessa returned to the kitchen. The morning rush ended at 7:20. There were still loaves on the shelf. Ruth stood behind the counter, looking at them. The old fear came quietly. The line had been shorter, the excitement already thinning. Yesterday, people had wanted to save her. Today, she had sent away the money and the friend who organized it. Luis placed the chocolate citrus cake in the display case. He had piped a small orange flower on top. European? Ruth asked. Seasonal. The front door opened. Alma Hawkins stepped inside, wearing her cafe apron. Ruth straightened. Alma put a paper supermarket roll bag on the counter between them. Friday, she said, 6 dozen, one more chance. Ruth looked at the bag, then at Alma. No memories, Alma said, just rolls. Ruth nodded. 6 o'clock. Alma left without buying anything. The promise settled over the counter, heavier than the donation jar and worth more. Ruth reached beneath the desk for the box Daniel had brought. She set it on the counter and took out the new shoes. Daniel noticed but wisely said nothing. She pulled off her old clogs. The soles were smooth as river stones. For one unguarded moment, she imagined Walter asking how many times she planned to fall before calling gravity impolite. The new shoes pinched at the toes. Ruth tied them anyway. The shoes did not make Ruth younger, but they did keep her from sliding when flour hit the floor. By 8:30, they had rubbed a blister onto her left heel. She put a bandage over it, changed socks, and refused Daniel's suggestion that she sit down. I bought you shoes, not a throne, he said. You bought me the wrong shoes. They are literally your size. My feet disagree. Luis, carrying a tray behind them, said, Feet are management, shoes are labor. Management always blames labor. Daniel looked at him. How long have you worked here? Long enough to understand the organization. Ruth sent both men to the kitchen. Tessa stayed at the counter, totaling the morning sales on the adding machine, because Ruth's computer system required 3 passwords and a willingness to forgive it. The numbers were good. Not miraculous, not enough to fix everything, but better than 6 ordinary Wednesdays combined. Then Tessa subtracted ingredients, deposit obligations, temporary wages, and Cal's estimated repair. The number became less exciting. We need to raise the twist price, Tessa said. We raised it last year. By a nickel. A nickel is money. Not since 1987. Ruth looked at her. You were not alive in 1987. I've read about it. Tessa turned the sales sheet around. Her handwriting had changed since her Bell's days. It used to tilt forward as if the words were rushing off the page. Now every figure stood separate and careful. Butter is up, she said. Berries are up. Boxes are up. You're making less on a hand pie than I made when I worked here. You made $9 an hour. That's my point. People know what a hand pie costs. People knew what gasoline costs too. Then it changed. Ruth hated pricing advice because it made affection look mathematical. Bell's had survived on the belief that a person could walk in with $5 and leave holding more comfort than $5 should buy. 10 cents, she said. 50, 20, 40, 25, and I stop letting you negotiate. Tessa extended her hand. Ruth did not shake it. You're not in charge. No, Tessa said, but you just moved. After closing, Ruth paid Luis and Tessa from the cash drawer. Luis counted once and put the bills in his wallet. Tessa folded hers into a square and slipped it behind her driver's license. I need both of you tomorrow, Ruth said. Luis nodded. Tessa hesitated. North Market has me in at noon. Come at 3. Leave at 11. That's 8 hours. Your arithmetic remains excellent. Tessa rubbed the torn pocket of her coat. I can come. Ruth wanted to ask what had happened in Columbus. She wanted to know whether the cafe had failed because of rent, pride, bad coffee, or the sour cream twists that should never have been called city swirls. Instead, she said, bring better shoes. Tessa glanced at Ruth's new pair. You first. She left before Ruth could answer. Daniel was scraping dried dough from the maple table. Paige had called him 4 times. He silenced every call without reading the screen. You should go home, Ruth said. I will, now. I'm finishing this. Your marriage cannot be improved with a bench scraper. Neither can the table if I leave this on it. Ruth took the scraper from him. Go. Daniel wiped his hands. She wants me to delete my comment. Will you? No. The answer came quickly, but he did not look brave. He looked ill. Do not make me the reason you refuse, Ruth said. You're not. She is going to think I chose you. I did choose you. I should have done it at dinner. You can defend the truth without choosing teams. That sounds nice. It is nice. It isn't real. The back door opened before Ruth could answer. Paige stood in the doorway wearing a belted gray coat and no expression at all. She had likely entered through the alley to avoid the front windows. The cold sharpened the perfume around her. You weren't answering, she said to Daniel. I was working. You don't work here. The sentence landed in Ruth's kitchen like a glass dropped at a party. Daniel untied Walter's apron. Let's go outside. No, I'm tired of having private conversations that end up as public comments. Luis was washing bowls at the sink. He shut off the water, dried his hands, and carried his jacket toward the office without looking at anyone. Ruth appreciated him for leaving and resented him for hearing. Daniel said, I told the truth. You made me look like a liar. You posted pictures of flour under a table while Mom was baking. I posted pictures of cracked floors and rust. You wrote unsanitary. I wrote that Marlowe deserves clean businesses. You knew exactly what people would hear. Paige's eyes flicked toward Ruth. Apparently everybody did. Ruth kept the bench scraper in her hand. Paige, she said, if you came to argue with Daniel, take him home. If you came to argue with me, he can leave. I came because a client canceled a staging consultation this morning. She said she couldn't work with someone who attacks local businesses. Daniel's anger changed shape. I'm sorry that happened. So am I. But I didn't send her. No, the newspaper did. Your mother's friends did. You did when you decided to correct me where everyone could see. Ruth put down the scraper. I never named you. You didn't have to. This town knows who your daughter-in-law is. The words held something Ruth had not considered. Paige was not merely a voice beneath a post. She had to walk into houses where people had read it. She had made that consequence herself, but consequences did not stop hurting because they were earned. Ruth said, take the pictures down. Paige's chin lifted. They're true. The pictures are. What you use them to say is not. The floor is damaged. Yes. The sink is rusting, stained. The mixer caught fire. It smoked. Paige gave a disbelieving laugh. Do you hear yourself? Constantly. You should try it. Daniel stepped between them. Enough. Paige looked past him at the towel-covered mixer, the stacked bus tubs, and the order pages clipped above the work table. You're proving my point, she said quietly. One machine breaks and strangers have to carry you. They're being paid, Ruth said. With what? 2 good sales days? Ruth felt the question because she had asked it privately that morning. Paige saw the hesitation. My parents did this. Every busy weekend became proof they were turning a corner. Every repair was temporary. They called it independence while everyone around them lived inside the emergency. I am not asking you to live inside anything. You asked Daniel without using the words. Daniel turned. Don't. What do you call this? Paige gestured at Walter's apron around him. He left our house before 3 this morning. I came because I wanted to. And that makes it sustainable? No, Ruth said. Both of them looked at her. The word surprised Ruth too. She picked up the sales sheet Tessa had calculated and folded it once. This week is not sustainable, she said. That does not mean selling is the only answer. Paige's face tightened. Then what is? I don't know yet. It was the first admission Ruth had made in front of her, and Paige did not know how to receive it. Daniel took off the apron. I'm ready. Paige backed toward the door. Her hand rested on the frame. I should not have used that word, she said. Ruth waited. But I'm not wrong about the building. There it was, half an apology held hostage by the need to win. Ruth nodded toward the doorway. Go home. After they left, Luis emerged from the office carrying his jacket. You can stop pretending you didn't hear, Ruth said. I heard very little. The office has a fax machine. I was overwhelmed. Mr. Pritchard sends things. I'm sure he does. Ruth began scraping the table. Luis put his jacket back on the hook. What needs doing for Friday? She looked at him. You have 6 dozen rolls due at 6, he said. That means the dough needs to be cold by tomorrow night. I thought you were leaving. I can miss 1 bus. I'll drive you. You have been awake since yesterday. So have you. I slept Monday. Ruth did not ask where. There was a narrow white line around his left ring finger, lighter than the rest of his hand. She had noticed it when he needed. Bus, she said. We prep tomorrow. He left through the alley. Ruth stayed long enough to finish cleaning. The towel over old Ironsides had collected a fine layer of flour. She lifted it, wiped the empty housing, and replaced it. When she reached home, Marlene's casserole dish sat on the front porch. It was clean. Inside was the key Marlene had carried to Belle's for 29 years. Ruth stood beneath the porch light with the dish in both hands. Marlene had not included a note. She did not need one. Ruth took the dish inside and placed it on the dining table where Paige's unfinished coffee had left a pale ring in the wood. She picked up her phone and called Marlene. The call went to voicemail. Ruth hung up without leaving a message. She slept for 3 hours, then woke with the shape of the key still in her mind. At 3 the next morning, Tessa arrived in sturdy kitchen shoes and set a paper cup beside Ruth's elbow. What is this? Coffee. I make coffee. You make brown water. Luis arrived 2 minutes later with a notebook full of production calculations. Daniel did not come. Nobody mentioned it. They mixed the granary order in 6 small batches, weighing each one. Tessa marked the tubs with times. Luis adjusted the yeast for the overnight rest. Ruth checked every figure, then checked his checking. At 7, the front line was only 8 people. At 8, 3 loaves remained. By 9, nobody was knocking. Ruth looked at the quiet sidewalk. The excitement was fading exactly as she had predicted, and sooner than she had feared. This is good, Luis said. Empty is good, predictable is good. Tessa tapped the order sheet. Friday's paid. Saturday has 9 orders. We can plan 9. Ruth looked at the unsold loaves. We made for 20. Then tomorrow we make for 12, Tessa said. The simplicity irritated Ruth. It also felt like oxygen. At 10:30, Cal called. The motor parts would not arrive until Monday. The rebuild would cost more than his estimate. Ruth wrote the number on the back of the sales sheet and did not swear until she had hung up. At noon, she called the roofer. Then a flooring company. Then a plumber who had once told Walter the pipe could wait another year. She arranged 3 estimates, not repairs. Estimates. It was a small distinction, but it belonged to her. That night, the 6 dozen rolls for Alma rested in the refrigerator, evenly spaced beneath clean towels. Ruth stood with the door open, counting them a 3rd time. Luis reached past her and switched off the kitchen light. They won't multiply in the dark, he said. They'd better not shrink. He closed the refrigerator. Ruth's phone buzzed. A message from Daniel appeared. "I'm sorry, I can't come tomorrow. Paige and I need some time." Ruth read it once and slid the phone into her pocket. "Everything all right?" Tessa asked. "No," Ruth said. Then she took out the production list and checked Friday's first oven time. The first tray went into the oven at 4:48. Ruth stood in front of the glass window and watched the rolls rise as if suspicion could improve yeast. Luis loaded the second oven. Tessa lined 6 empty bread crates with fresh paper and labeled each one "Granary" in thick black marker. At 5:06, the tops began to color. "Turn the tray," Ruth said. "It has another 2 minutes," Luis replied. "The left rear runs hot." "You said the right rear ran hot. The deck oven runs hot on the left. The convection oven runs hot on the right." "Why?" "Because they're individuals." Luis rotated the tray. The rolls came out with rounded tops and thin, tender sides, each one nearly identical to the next. Ruth broke open a spare. Steam touched her face. The crumb pulled apart in soft strands. Tessa took a piece. "I did not offer you that." "You were making a face." "This is my face," Tessa chewed. "Needs salt." Ruth stared at her. Tessa swallowed and grinned. "It doesn't." Ruth threw a towel at her. By 5:35, all 72 rolls were in crates. They had made 6 extra in case one tray misbehaved, then rejected 4 for being too dark or too small. Luis ate 1 rejected roll while carrying the crates to Walter's delivery van. The van had once been white. Time had turned it the color of old teeth. Bell's Bakery remained painted on both sides in red script, though the B on the passenger side had peeled until it looked like an R. Ruth opened the driver's door. Luis touched the rusted bottom edge. "This passes inspection?" "It passes quickly. I can drive. You can follow." "In what?" "The bus?" Tessa climbed into the passenger seat. "I'll make sure she doesn't race." "I don't race," Ruth said. "You passed me on Broad Street doing 50 once. That was 6 years ago. You shook your fist. You were driving badly." Ruth started the engine. It answered with a cough and then a long metallic complaint. Luis looked through the windshield at her. She waved him away. The granary's kitchen entrance opened onto a narrow service lane behind the courthouse. Alma was waiting in her apron with a clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Curtis, her morning cook, carried the crates inside while Alma counted. Ruth waited for praise and disliked herself for it. Alma opened one bag, pressed a roll gently between her fingers, then tore it in half. 6 dozen, Ruth said. "Delivered at 5:53. I have a clock." "I know." Alma tasted the roll. "Well," Ruth asked, "do you want me to eat it or testify?" "Either." Alma chewed. "It's good." Tessa leaned against the van, hiding a smile. Alma made a note on her clipboard. Next Tuesday, same order. Ruth's breath left quietly. And Friday, 1 delivery at a time. Fair. Alma looked at the old van. Walter used to carry the crates all the way to the bread station. Walter enjoyed showing off. He also brought my invoices. Ruth had left the invoice on the desk. Tessa opened her canvas bag and handed Alma a white envelope. Ruth turned. "When did you do that?" "While you were counting rolls for the 7th time. It was the 4th. Alma tucked the invoice under her clipboard. "Keep her. She's temporary. So are we all?" Luis had said almost the same thing. Ruth wondered if everyone had joined a club without telling her. As they pulled away, Tessa glanced into the side mirror. "You smiled." "I did not." "You have a nice smile. You should bring it out for holidays." Ruth shifted into second with more force than necessary. The Friday crowd was steady, but ordinary. A dozen people waited at opening, then business settled into the familiar rhythm of coffee, bread, change, and conversation. The newspaper attention had moved to a water main break on Oak Street. Nobody photographed the display case. Nobody called Ruth beloved. She found the normalcy restful until she found it insulting. At 10, Tessa changed the chalkboard prices. The sour cream twist went up 25 cents. A regular named Phil stared at the new number for a full 15 seconds. "Inflation?" he asked. "Extortion," Ruth said. He bought 2. The flooring estimator arrived after closing. He was a heavy man named Jerome with blue paper covers over his work boots and a laser measure clipped to his belt. Ruth watched him examine each crack. "This section has to come out," he said. "Why?" "It's loose. It's been loose since 2009. That doesn't make it attached." He tapped a tile with the handle of a screwdriver. It answered with a hollow click. Ruth looked at Luis, who wisely studied the ceiling. Jerome's estimate included demolition, leveling, commercial tile, new base, and 3 days with no production. The number at the bottom was more than Ruth had paid for her first car. "I don't need the front room," she said. "This is kitchen only. I don't need the whole kitchen. If I patch the visible cracks, the tile beside them starts failing next. What if you don't use such expensive tile? Then you call me again in 5 years. In 5 years, I might be dead." Jerome did not know whether to laugh. Ruth did. Write both options. The plumber came next. He found the slow drip behind the utility sink. The corroded connection Paige had photographed, and a shut-off valve that no longer fully shut. "Walter said that valve had personality," Ruth said. "It does. Bad personality." His estimate was smaller, but not small. The roofer returned at 4 to inspect the water stain and confirm his repair had held. Ruth paid him the final balance. When he left, the bakery felt as though every surface had begun whispering a price. Tessa sat at the maple table with the 3 estimates, the sales sheets, and Ruth's expense ledger. "You don't have to look at that," Ruth said. "You asked me to price Saturday. That is not Saturday." "No." Ruth pulled the ledger toward herself. Tessa kept one hand on it. "You need to know what I cost. I know what I pay you. That's not the same thing." Luis was wrapping dough for the refrigerator. He did not interfere, which was its own kind of participation. Tessa released the ledger. "My cafe didn't fail because nobody came." Ruth waited. People came. At first. We had lines opening week. A food blogger wrote about us. I thought full seats meant we were making money. "You charge $6 for a twist. $5.75. For my twist." Tessa's face tightened. "Yes." The words stayed between them. "I changed the filling," she added. "You changed the name. I thought if I brought what I knew, I could build something that felt like mine. You could have asked. I thought you'd say no. I might have. That's why I didn't." Ruth closed the ledger. "That does not help your case. I'm not making a case. I'm telling you, I know what it looks like when the room is full and the numbers are empty. Why did you close? Rent went up. I had 2 equipment loans. I kept too many menu items because I was afraid people would stop coming if I cut anything. Then I borrowed to cover payroll." Ruth heard no request for sympathy in her voice. That made it harder not to give. "What happened to the equipment?" "Sold, mostly for less than I owed. The sheet pans?" Tessa looked down. "I still have those." Ruth turned toward the sink, so neither of them had to decide what that meant. Luis set the wrapped dough in the refrigerator. "You need fewer products." Ruth looked over her shoulder. "You need fewer opinions." "He's right," Tessa said. "I was successful before either of you learned my back door opened." "You had Walter," Tessa said. The same phrase Marlene had thrown at her. Ruth's anger rose, but beneath it was something colder. Walter had done the invoices, repair calls, deliveries, and purchasing. Ruth had been the bakery's hands and palate. Since his death, she had done his work at night after finishing her own, badly and privately, as if secrecy could keep grief from becoming evidence. "I still have me," Ruth said. "Yes," Tessa replied. "That's what we're trying to budget." Ruth left before she said something unforgivable. She drove the van to Marlene's house with the clean casserole dish beside her. The returned key lay inside it, sliding softly every time Ruth turned. Marlene's bungalow was dark, except for the blue light of a television in the front room. Ruth knocked twice. Marlene opened the door wearing a robe and no lipstick. "I brought your dish," Ruth said. "I saw the van." "Then why did you make me knock? I wanted to see if you would." Ruth held out the dish. Marlene took it. The key remained inside. "You forgot something," Ruth said. "No." "Marlene, I had that key because you trusted me. I still trust you. You accused me of making you look finished. You did." Marlene's mouth tightened. "Then why would you trust me?" "Because people can do a wrong thing without becoming a wrong person." "That sounds very wise." "I heard it somewhere. Not from yourself." Ruth glanced toward the street. "I should not have said it in front of everybody. No, you should have waited and said it cruelly in private." "I'm apologizing." "You're circling an apology with your turn signal on." Ruth took a breath. "I embarrassed you. I was angry, and I wanted you to feel it." "I'm sorry." Marlene looked down at the dish. "I refunded everyone," she said. "Even Phoenix. Thank you. You needed that money. I need many things. Apparently not friends." That is not fair. Neither was what you did. Ruth nodded. No. The television murmured behind Marlene. Somewhere on screen, canned laughter rose and died. Ruth reached into the dish, took out the key, and held it toward her. Marlene did not take it. I'm still mad, she said. You can be mad with access. That is the most Ruth Bell apology I've ever received. Is that yes? Marlene plucked the key from Ruth's fingers. It is not no. She began to close the door, then stopped. Your bee is falling off the van. I know. It looks like Rel's bakery. I know. Walter would hate that. I know, Marlene. The door closed gently. Back in the van, Ruth rested both hands on the cracked steering wheel. The engine took 3 attempts to start. On the drive home, the heater blew cold air against her knees, and the right headlight flickered whenever she hit a bump. For the first time, Ruth did not tell the van it had plenty of life left. The van started on the first try Saturday morning, which felt manipulative. Ruth drove it to Bell's anyway. She had spent half the night adding columns, crossing out columns, and discovering that Walter's old calculator only displayed 8 digits because he had never expected their problems to need 9. At the bakery, Luis had already written a production schedule on butcher paper. Tessa had reduced the menu to 6 items. Ruth restored oatmeal cookies, making 7. They use leftover egg whites, she said. They also use oven space, Tessa replied. They're profitable. Tessa looked delighted. You calculated profit? I have always calculated profit. You estimated profit. I calculated in my head. You estimated accurately in your head. Do you want the cookies or not? I want to frame this moment. They made the cookies. The Saturday customers arrived in a steady stream instead of a wave. Ruth kept 2 loaves beneath the counter for regulars who worked late shifts and could never reach Bell's before sellout. She had never done that before. First come had always meant first served. But this week had taught her that a line rewarded the people with time to stand in one. At 9, Marlene came through the back door using her key. She wore coral lipstick and carried a stack of flattened boxes. I am still angry, she announced. Good morning. I am here because Daniel's folding is a public hazard. Daniel had not come. Ruth did not correct her. Marlene set down the boxes and nodded toward the chalkboard. Oatmeal cookies, profitable. Marlene stared at Tessa. Tessa spread both hands. I witnessed it. Marlene took her usual place at the register. She did not hug Ruth. She did not mention the fundraiser. When a customer offered to donate toward repairs, Marlene said, You can donate by buying something and taking it home. Ruth heard and kept shaping dough. Near noon, Daniel sent a message asking how business was. Ruth answered with one word, predictable. He replied that predictable was good. She did not answer again. After closing, the 4 of them sat around the maple table with Saturday's totals. Luis ate an oatmeal cookie, then took a second when he thought Ruth was not looking. If this is temporary, Tessa said, we need to know what temporary means. Ruth turned a sales sheet. It means it doesn't last. Helpful, Marlene said. Luis brushed crumbs from his mustache. I have an interview Tuesday. The news caught Ruth in a place she had not guarded. Where? A supermarket bakery outside Dayton. That's not baking. It has health insurance. Tessa looked down at the ledger. Ruth said, You should go. I plan to. Of course. Luis's expression shifted. That wasn't an insult. I didn't take it as one. You made your insult face. This is my face. Marlene sighed. I cannot spend another week listening to that exchange. Ruth studied the wage column. Paying Luis and Tessa for the hours they had worked, left enough from the busy week to cover ingredients and part of the mixer repair. It did not create money for flooring, plumbing, or a life beyond Bell's. What would you need? She asked. Luis leaned back. For what? To stay for a month. Nobody spoke. A trial month, Ruth added. 4 days a week. We close Mondays. Tessa works around North Market until we know whether this is foolish. Tessa's eyes lifted. Close Mondays? Machines require maintenance. Marlene looked at Ruth's swollen thumb. And people, Ruth said. Luis named a weekly figure. It was less than his hotel pay, and more than Ruth had prepared herself to hear. 3/4 of that, she said. And lunch. Your coffee? No. Then agreed. Tessa tapped her own name in the ledger. Do I negotiate separately? You get what he gets per hour. Luis raised an eyebrow. She knows my recipes, Ruth said. Tessa's mouth tightened at the word My, but she nodded. Ruth wrote the arrangement on the back of an invoice and made them both sign it. Marlene signed as witness, adding a flourish so large it occupied the bottom third of the page. When they left, Ruth stood alone in the quiet kitchen. Walter's coat hung beside Luis's jacket until Luis returned for it 2 minutes later. Almost forgot, he said. Ruth watched the empty hook after he was gone. On Sunday, she did not enter the bakery until 6 in the evening. She had driven past twice before that. The closed blinds made the building look offended. Ruth let herself in, watered the ivy near the front window, and sat at the office desk with the repair estimates. She wrote 3 lists: must, should, and Walter would argue. The shut-off valve went under must. The floor went under must after she moved it twice. A new display case went under should. Repainting the front sign belonged beneath Walter's name. The van did not fit on any list. She opened the bottom desk drawer and found its service records tied with kitchen twine. Walter had kept every receipt, including one for wiper blades from 1999. He had written, "Not worth a damn," across the top in blue ink. Ruth laughed aloud. Then she pressed the receipt to her mouth and cried so abruptly that the sound frightened her. She cried for less than a minute. Grief had become efficient. Afterwards, she added, "Cell van," beneath must. Cal arrived Monday with old Ironside's rebuilt motor on a hand truck. Ruth watched him install it, while Luis organized dry storage and Tessa scraped old labels from ingredient bins. When Cal restored power, the mixer came alive with a smoother hum than Ruth remembered. She laid one hand against the housing. "Well?" Cal asked. "Too quiet. That's generally considered a repair. It used to growl. It was asking for help." Ruth looked at him. Cal packed his tools. "Machines don't get nostalgic, Ruth. Convenient for them." He left his invoice on the desk. At 10, a tapping sound came from the alley. Ruth went to the back door expecting another loose branch against the drainpipe. Instead, 2 men in yellow safety vests stood near the rear boundary. One held a measuring wheel. The other had placed an orange flag beside the van. "What are you doing?" The man with the wheel looked up. "Site verification." "For what site?" He glanced at the bakery. "Bell parcel." "This is the Bell parcel." "Yes, ma'am." "Then verify yourselves off it." The second man approached with a clipboard. "We were told access was approved. By whom?" He checked the top page. "Daniel Bell." The alley narrowed around her. "When?" "Original visit was in January. We're confirming setbacks for the preliminary concept." Ruth stepped down from the doorway. "You were here before?" "A different crew, likely. I only have the field notes." She remembered a muddy print near the rear fence one morning, the latch left hooked backward. Daniel had changed the bulb over the loading door that same week. She had thought he came to do that. What concept? The man hesitated, then turned his clipboard. A glossy image showed Ruth's corner transformed into a 3-story brick development with black-framed windows. The ground floor held a cafe with metal chairs outside. Above it, balconies jutted over Main Street. The cafe's sign read, "Bell Court." The old bakery was nowhere in the picture. "This is not approved," Ruth said. "We understand. It's preliminary. Who paid you?" "We contract with Kessler Development. Get off my property." Both men gathered their equipment quickly. The orange flag remained by the van until Ruth pulled it from the ground and snapped the thin wire against her knee. She called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "Mom, come to the bakery. I'm at work." "So am I." "What happened? Come tell me." He arrived 35 minutes later without a coat, his tie loosened and his face already guilty. Ruth had placed the glossy rendering on the maple table. Daniel stopped when he saw it. Tessa and Luis were in the front room, restocking shelves. Ruth had not asked them to leave. This was her workplace, and Daniel's private decisions had arrived wearing safety vests. "You gave them permission," she said, "to measure, that's all. You gave strangers permission to walk around my building. I thought we needed real numbers. Who is we?" Daniel pulled out a chair but did not sit. Kessler said he couldn't make a formal offer without understanding what could fit on the lot. "I did not ask for a formal offer. You kept saying his number wasn't real. So, you helped him make it real? I was trying to give you options. You had a picture made of my bakery gone. I didn't commission the rendering. Kessler did, with your permission. I didn't know what it would look like." Ruth tapped the invented cafe. "They kept my name." Daniel looked at it and winced. "I hadn't seen that." "When were you planning to show me any of this? When the proposal was complete? When I could be impressed? when you could make an informed decision. Ruth laughed once. Informed by everybody except me. Daniel rubbed above his eyebrow. Mom, the building needed work. You wouldn't talk about selling. Dad had been gone 6 months, and you were running yourself into the ground. I thought if you saw a serious plan, you thought grief made me unreasonable. I thought grief made all of us unreasonable. That answer stopped her for half a second. Then she saw a line at the bottom of the rendering. Interior staging consultation, Page Bell design. What is that? Daniel followed her finger. Page introduced Kessler to one of his investors, he said. He offered her a referral fee and the chance to bid on the model units. Did she take the fee? It was paid to her business, and you sat at my table discussing the sale as though it had nothing to do with you. It wasn't contingent on you selling. That makes it worse. It was a referral, Mom. Her business has been slow, so mine was useful. Daniel's face reddened. That's not fair. The phrase returned them both to Sunday dinner. Ruth reached into the office and took the banking folder from the desk. After Walter died, Daniel had helped move supplier payments online. His name was not on the business, but he had login access and authority to speak to Mr. Pritchard when Ruth was unavailable. I want you off the bakery accounts, she said. His face changed. I have never touched your money. This is not about stealing. Then what is it about? You keep confusing access with permission. I was helping. You were arranging my future behind my back. I was afraid you wouldn't have one if I waited for you to ask. The words hung between them, cruel because they were frightened. Ruth's voice lowered. Love without respect is just management, Daniel. I will not be managed by my son. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. He took his keys from his pocket and removed the small brass key to Belle's back door. He set it beside the glossy picture. Unlike Marlene, he did not wait to be asked to take it back. The brass key looked smaller than Ruth remembered. Daniel's footsteps crossed the front room. The bell above the door gave one soft jingle when he left, polite as a customer who had forgotten to buy anything. Ruth did not follow him. For several seconds, she listened to the mixer turn behind her. Old Ironsides hummed with its rebuilt motor, steady and indifferent. The glossy picture of Belle Court remained on the table beneath Daniel's key. Tessa came through the kitchen door holding a box of labels. Do you want us to leave? No, you might want to throw something. I don't throw equipment. Luis appeared behind her. We can move the equipment. Ruth looked at him. Noted, he said. She carried the rendering into the office, folded it in half, and put it face down beneath Cal's invoice. She placed Daniel's key in the top desk drawer, then shut it harder than necessary. Tuesday's 6 dozen, she said. If we're going to keep Alma, we start now. Nobody told her she did not have to work. That was why she could. They weighed flour. Tessa labeled the tubs. Luis checked the restored mixer at low speed before increasing it, one hand hovering near the switch. Ruth stood close enough to hear any change in the motor. After 20 minutes, she said, It sounds wrong. It sounds new, Luis replied. That's what's wrong. He lowered the speed. You don't trust quiet? Quiet is when people arrange things. Tessa looked toward the office. Ruth measured salt. At noon, she called Mr. Pritchard. His fax machine screamed once in the background, while he confirmed that Daniel's online access could be removed without changing the business account itself. Has there been a problem? He asked. No. Ruth. Not with the money. He was silent. Mr. Pritchard had been Walter's accountant before he was Ruth's, and he treated pauses as billable tools. I'll take care of it, he said. Today. When the call ended, Ruth opened the top drawer. Daniel's key lay beside a roll of stamps and 2 peppermint candies. She closed it again. At 5:51 Tuesday morning, Alma's rolls arrived at the granary with an invoice clipped to the top crate. Ruth did not make the delivery. Curtis picked them up from Belle's back door. It saved 30 minutes, a gallon of gas, and the need to start the van. Ruth should have been pleased. Instead, she watched the empty loading space as if Walter might pull in late, complaining about courthouse traffic. Tessa set a mug beside her. Coffee. Why do you keep doing this? Because you keep drinking it. The front bell rang. Their first customer bought 1 loaf and 2 twists without mentioning the newspaper, Page, or Ruth's courage. The second customer complained that the twist cost 25 cents more. Ruth felt oddly reassured. By Thursday, the business had settled into a shape they could predict. Not the old Bells, and not the frantic bakery from the line. They made fewer items, sold most of them, and stopped accepting orders when the production board was full. Luis taught Tessa a faster way to laminate Danish dough. Tessa built a spreadsheet Ruth disliked until it correctly predicted how many pounds of butter they would need on Friday. Marlene resumed her register shifts, but refused to call herself forgiven. "I'm evaluating your behavior," she said. "Charge people while you do." The estimates remained under Cal's invoice. Every night, Ruth carried them home. Every morning, she brought them back unopened. The flooring company called twice. The plumber called once. On Friday, Jerome left a message saying he had an opening the following week if she wanted it. Ruth stood in the office with the receiver in her hand. The bakery floor showed every choice she had postponed. Hairline cracks ran between patches Walter had laid himself. Near the sink, one tile shifted when Luis stepped on it. A dark line of old adhesive had appeared along the edge. The floor was clean. Paige had still been right that it needed replacing. Ruth called Jerome back. "Kitchen only," she said. "The durable tile." He named the deposit. "I know the number. We'll need the room cleared by Sunday night. You can reopen Thursday if everything cures properly. Wednesday. Thursday. Wednesday afternoon. Thursday, Mrs. Bell." Ruth looked through the office door. Luis was lifting a flour sack. Tessa was trimming labels. Marlene was arguing with Earl about whether a raisin counted as fruit. "Thursday," Ruth said. She scheduled the plumber for the same closure. Then she called a number she had written on a grocery receipt 3 days earlier. The buyer arrived Saturday after closing. His name was Leonard Voss, and he delivered flowers to funeral homes in 3 counties. He walked around Walter's van twice, crouched to inspect the rust, and opened the rear doors. The cargo area still smelled faintly of bread. "Transmission?" he asked. "Original?" He made a face. "It has never stranded me. Recently." That was not part of my sentence. Leonard started the engine, listened, then checked the tires. The price he offered was insulting. Ruth told him so. He increased it by $400. "That won't cover the floor deposit. I'm buying a 28-year-old van with one headlight considering retirement. The engine is good. The engine is thoughtful. Takes its time starting." Ruth folded her arms. $4,500, $38, $43, and I leave the shelving. He looked into the back again. Walter had built the shelves from plywood and aluminum rails, measuring every pan twice. 41, 42. Leonard held out his hand. Ruth stared at it. Tessa, standing near the back door, turned away to give her privacy. Luis studied the invoice board. Marlene pretended to sort cash. Ruth shook Leonard's hand. He counted out a deposit and promised to bring the balance Monday. The van would be repainted in the florist's dark green. He said the shelving was perfect for standing sprays, funeral flowers. Walter would have appreciated the practical fit and made a joke Ruth would have pretended not to enjoy. "Don't cover the B until you paint the whole thing," she said. Leonard glanced at the peeling lettering. "Wasn't planning to drive around as Rel's florist." "Good." After he left, Ruth went into the cargo area alone. A gray sweater of Walter's was wedged behind the passenger seat. She had searched for it the winter before he died and accused him of leaving it at the hardware store. The elbows were stretched. One pocket held a petrified peppermint and a receipt for diesel fuel, though the van used gasoline. Ruth sat on the wheel well with the sweater in her lap. The bakery walls muted the sounds from Main Street. She could hear Luis rolling a rack across the kitchen and Marlene speaking softly to Tessa. None of them came out. Ruth pressed the sweater to her face. It no longer smelled like Walter. It smelled like dust, old wool, and the van. That hurt worse. She folded it and carried it inside. On the front counter, Tessa had placed the 3 repair estimates beside a blank sheet of paper. "What's that?" Ruth asked. "Closure notice. I can write." "I know." Ruth uncapped a pen. She began with Bell's Bakery will be closed for necessary improvements, then crossed out necessary because it sounded defensive. She tried due to overwhelming community support and crossed out that too because it sounded like the fundraiser wearing a clean shirt. Finally, she wrote, "Bell's will be closed Monday through Wednesday while we replace the kitchen floor and repair old plumbing. The bakery was never unsanitary. Some things were clean and still needed to change. We should have changed them sooner. We reopened Thursday at 5 a.m. with a smaller menu, fairer prices, and the same recipes. No donations, come hungry." She handed the page to Tessa. Tessa read it twice. Fairer prices? Fair to us, too. A smile spread across Tessa's face. Don't make a ceremony, Ruth said. Marlene took a photograph of the notice and posted it online with Ruth's permission. By evening, comments appeared beneath it. Some people thanked Ruth for being honest. Several said they would come Thursday. One man complained about the closure as if Ruth had personally canceled breakfast. Paige did not comment. Daniel did. Proud of you, Mom. Ruth read the 4 words and turned off her phone. On Sunday evening, they emptied the kitchen. Every movable rack went into the front room. Mixing bowls filled the display cases. Sheet pans leaned behind the register. Old Ironsides was unbolted from the floor and rolled aside with Cal's help. When they lifted the maple table, a square of lighter tile showed beneath each leg. Louise ran one hand along the scarred edge. This stays? It stays. It has to come out while they level. Then it comes back. They carried it into the front room together. Ruth took the end Walter always carried. It was heavier than she remembered, or she was not. At 7, only the wall ovens and utility sink remained. The kitchen echoed. Ruth stood in the middle of the cracked floor. Without equipment, the room looked smaller and much older. The front bell rang. Daniel entered carrying a paper envelope. Ruth's back tightened. We're closed. I saw the notice. Then you read correctly. He looked around at the stripped kitchen. You're really doing it. That was the impression I intended. He set the envelope on the counter. I told Kessler there will be no proposal. I withdrew permission for any more site work. You never had permission to give, I know. And Paige's fee? Daniel rubbed his forehead. Kessler wouldn't take it back from her business because the referral happened. So I sent him the same amount from our joint account and told him to keep it out of any future deal. Ruth stared at him. Did Paige agree? No. You took money from your wife to correct something you did to me. Our money, did she agree? No. The empty kitchen made each answer ring. Daniel's voice sharpened. What was I supposed to do? Leave it? You were supposed to stop arranging women's lives while telling yourself it was protection. His face went pale. Ruth regretted the sentence before it finished, but not enough to take it back. I was trying to make it right, he said. You cannot make it right with somebody else's consent. He looked at the envelope. Those are the banking confirmations. I'm off everything. Ruth did not touch it. Daniel nodded toward Walter's sweater folded on the counter. Where did you find that? In the van. You sold it? Yes. He looked toward the alley as though the van had already vanished. Dad loved that thing. He loved me more. Daniel's eyes returned to hers. Ruth picked up the brass key from beside the register. She had taken it from the desk drawer that morning. For a second, his hand opened. Ruth closed her fingers around the key. Not yet, she said. Daniel lowered his hand. I understand. This time, when he left, he did not say he would come back. By the time Jerome's crew arrived, Ruth had moved Daniel's envelope into the office without opening it. She kept the brass key in her apron pocket. The crew rolled in carts, pry bars, dust barriers, and a machine that looked designed to remove a floor from its beliefs. Jerome taped plastic across the kitchen doorway and told Ruth she could watch from the front room. This is my building. Yes, ma'am, I need to see what you're doing. You can see through the plastic. It's cloudy. That's because it keeps dust out. I won't complain about dust. Jerome looked at her. Ruth folded her arms. I won't complain immediately. He unzipped a narrow opening and let her stand inside until the first tile cracked beneath the machine. The sound shot through her chest. She knew the floor had to come out. She had written the check. Still, watching it break felt like witnessing surgery performed by carpenters. The pale green tile had been Walter's choice. Ruth had wanted cream. Walter said cream would show every blueberry that rolled beneath a rack. Ruth said the purpose of a floor was not to camouflage failure. They argued in the tile store for 40 minutes and bought green because it was on clearance. Jerome pried up another section. Careful near the table marks, Ruth said. The table is in the front room. I know where the table is. I'm telling you there's nothing near the marks. There used to be. Jerome shut off the machine. Mrs. Bell, I have 2,800 square feet to remove in 3 days. 700. It feels like 2,800 when you supervise each tile. Louise touched Ruth's elbow through the plastic opening. We need to count packaging. I know how much packaging we have. Then you can prove it. He guided her out before Jerome could. The bakery's front room had become storage. Mixing bowls occupied the display cases. Flour bins stood where customers usually waited. The maple table ran diagonally between the counter and the window, too large to fit anywhere politely. Tessa sat beneath it with a clipboard, counting cake boards. "What are you doing under there?" The table moved. I didn't. "Come out." "Why?" "Because customers will see you through the window." "We're closed." "They can still see." Tessa crawled out. 32 10-inch boards, 9 8-inch, no 6-inch. "We never make 6-inch cakes. You made 2 last month. Those were large cupcakes." Tessa wrote 6-inch boards on the supply list. The front bell rang at 10. Leonard Voss stood outside holding a cashier's check and the van's new registration paperwork. Ruth had forgotten he was coming, though she had watched the alley every few minutes since dawn. He counted the balance onto the counter anyway, as if physical bills might make the sale less final. Ruth counted after him. Then she went outside with the title, and Walter's gray sweater folded beneath her arm. The van waited at the curb. Leonard had brought a magnetic sign to cover the Peeling Bells Bakery until he repainted. Voss Floral Service sat crookedly over Walter's lettering. "Straighten that," Ruth said. "It's temporary. Temporary can still be straight." He adjusted it. Ruth opened the driver's door one last time. The seat had formed itself around Walter's shape, the left side more worn because he kept his wallet in his back pocket. A flower fingerprint remained near the radio knob. Ruth rubbed it once with her thumb and stopped before it disappeared. Marlene stood on the sidewalk without speaking. Ruth handed Leonard the keys. The van coughed on the second turn, then started. Leonard shifted carefully and pulled away from the curb. At the corner, the bad right headlight flickered in daylight. Ruth watched until the van turned. Marlene slipped her hand into Ruth's. Ruth let it stay. "Funeral flowers," Marlene said after a moment. Walter would make an inappropriate joke. He made an inappropriate joke at his own funeral. He recorded it beforehand. He made Daniel play it. They both laughed, and Ruth's laugh broke in the middle. Marlene squeezed her fingers. "The money covers the floor? Most of the deposit, not all?" "The plumbing took the rest." "What about reopening costs?" "I have money. How much?" "You got your key back, not my bank statements." Marlene withdrew her hand. "Good. You're still irritating." Inside, Jerome called Ruth through the plastic. The old adhesive had bonded unevenly to the slab. Grinding and leveling would add a day's labor and $800. Ruth looked toward the window where the van had been. "Do it," she said. At noon, Luis left for his supermarket interview, wearing a navy button-down shirt and carrying his denim jacket over one arm. Tessa watched him tie his shoes. "Are you coming back?" she asked. "The interview is outside Dayton, not the moon. That is not what I meant." Luis looked at Ruth. She was organizing invoices that did not require organization. "If they offer you the job, take it," she said. "They may not. Then don't." He smiled slightly. Excellent career advice. The bell rang behind him when he left. Ruth put one invoice into a folder, took it out, and placed it in another. Tessa said, "You could ask him to stay. He knows I offered a month." "That's not the same." "What do you want me to do? Promise him health insurance with cookies?" "No." "Promise work I don't know I'll have?" "No." "Then count the cake boards again." "I already counted them." "You did it from under a table. Your perspective was unreliable." Tessa sat down on a flour bin. "I should have asked about the twists," she said. Ruth looked up. "In Columbus. I should have called you before I put them on the menu. This is not about Luis. I know. You're nervous, and it makes you slower. I've been waiting for a chance. I am not nervous." Tessa waited. Ruth set down the invoice. "I gave you those recipes because I thought you were taking part of Bell's with you," she said. "I did not understand you planned to sell it back to strangers under another name. I thought if I called them Bell's Twists, people would say I couldn't make anything of my own. So you changed the name and proved them right." Tessa accepted that. "The cafe was failing before it closed," she said. "I kept that twist because it was the one thing people ordered twice. Every time somebody complimented it, I felt relieved and sick." "Good, I know." "No, you don't. Good that they ordered it twice. It is a good twist." Tessa's eyes filled, which made Ruth uncomfortable. "I'm still angry," Ruth said. "You can be. I don't know if I'll ever stop being angry. You don't have to stop all at once." Ruth sat across from her. Between them, the tabletop bore hundreds of fine cuts from knives and scrapers. Tessa traced one without touching it. "The chocolate citrus cake sold," Ruth said. European? Seasonal. Someone asked if we'd have it again. What did you say? That it wasn't my decision. Ruth considered this. Make one for Thursday. Tessa looked up. Your recipe or mine? Yours. The answer frightened Ruth with how much it sounded like a door opening. Luis returned at 4 carrying a folder and a supermarket bakery's blue pen. They offered it, he said. Tessa swore softly. Ruth kept her eyes on the ledger. When do you start? I don't. The room became too quiet, though grinders roared behind the plastic. Why? Ruth asked. Night shift. 52 miles each way. The insurance starts after 90 days, and they want me to supervise frozen dough. You knew where Dayton was before the interview. I wanted to see if I was still employable. And, apparently, if I'm willing to be unhappy at scale. Ruth closed the ledger. You cannot turn down a steady job for a 1-month arrangement. I can. I just did. That is foolish. Yes. Tessa's cafe failed because she made decisions like that. Also rent, Tessa said. Luis sat at the maple table. I need steady hours. I need 2 consecutive days off once a month to see my mother in Cleveland. I need a wage review in 90 days. If Bells can't do those things, I keep looking. Ruth studied him. No insurance. I buy through the exchange now. No hotel salary. I noticed. 4 days. More during holidays if we agree first. And the wage review? If sales hold. What does hold mean? Tessa slid the sales sheet between them. We put a number on it. They did. The written arrangement covered half a sheet of butcher paper. Tessa demanded one too. Ruth gave her the same wage terms and required 1 week's notice around North Market shifts. Marlene signed as witness again, though nobody asked her. Now it's a business, she said. It was a business before you were born, Ruth replied. Before Luis, maybe, not me. The new floor went down Wednesday morning, charcoal commercial tile, plain enough to hide nothing. By afternoon, the plumber had replaced the corroded connection, the failed shut-off valve, and a section of pipe behind the sink. At 6, Jerome allowed them to walk on the floor in clean shoes. At 8, they began carrying equipment back. The maple table entered first. Ruth directed every inch of its placement, not where it had been, but closer to the ovens, leaving a wider path to the sink. Luis suggested turning it 90 degrees. Ruth said no. Tessa measured, turned it 90 degrees, and Ruth discovered he was right. Old iron sides returned to its bolts. The racks followed. Bowls left the display cases. At midnight, the kitchen was whole again and completely unfamiliar. Ruth stood beneath the pressed tin ceiling with the new floor cool under her shoes. Walter's green tile was gone. She felt guilty for liking the charcoal. At 3 Thursday morning, she unlocked the back door. Luis arrived with coffee. Tessa carried the chocolate citrus cake in a white box. Marlene brought the order pad and refused to accept deposits until Ruth gave written permission. They moved carefully at first, each of them mistrusting the clean open paths. Then the old rhythm returned in a new shape. At 4:40, Ruth looked through the front window. A line had formed before dawn, not the crowd from the newspaper. 18 people, perhaps 20. Earl had his folding chair. The radiology nurse stood behind him. Alma waited near the end in her cafe apron. Nobody held a protest sign or a phone. They were simply hungry. Ruth unlocked the door at 5. Earl stamped his feet on the mat. I hear the twists cost more. They do. Floor must be expensive. It is. He placed exact change on the counter, including the extra quarter. By 7, the chocolate citrus cake had sold by the slice. By 8, Alma ordered 2 whole cakes for the granary's weekend case. Tessa wrote the order without looking at Ruth first. Ruth saw and said nothing. At 9:30, when the rush had thinned, the bell rang. Daniel stepped inside carrying no key and wearing no coat. He looked as though he had not slept. Ruth came out from behind the counter. What happened? He glanced at the customers, then toward the kitchen. Paige and I are staying apart, he said. I moved into a hotel last night. Ruth's first impulse was to ask what Paige had done. Her second was to ask what Daniel had done. She trusted the second more. Come into the office, she said. Daniel followed her past the new display arrangement. Several customers pretended not to notice him. Earl made no such effort. He watched Daniel cross the room while chewing a twist with the solemnity of a jury foreman. Ruth closed the office door. There was only one chair besides hers. Daniel sat in it and leaned forward, hands clasped between his knees. Without a coat, he looked unfinished. "Did she throw you out?" Ruth asked. "No." "Did you leave?" "Yes." "Was anybody in danger?" Daniel looked up. "No." "Then breathe before you explain." He did, though not very well. "We fought about the money I sent Kessler. Then we fought about the post, then the client who canceled, then everything else we've apparently been saving for a special occasion." Ruth sat behind the desk. Cal's invoice, the repair estimates, and the folded bell court rendering occupied one corner. She resisted the urge to cover them. Paige said, "I have spent our whole marriage trying to keep everyone calm, so I never have to say what I want." Is she wrong? No. The speed of his answer surprised her. She said, "You're the reason I do it?" Ruth's jaw tightened. "I told her that part was mine," Daniel continued. "She said I always say that after the damage, when saying it makes me look decent. Is she wrong?" He gave her a tired, almost amused look. "You two would be terrifying on the same side." "We are not discussing sides. That's what you said before." "I was right before." Daniel pressed his palms together. "She asked if I regretted giving Kessler access. I said yes. She asked if I regretted returning the referral money without telling her. I said no. That was the wrong answer. I know that now. You knew it when you did it, yes." The new honesty did not make his choices better. It did make him sound less like a boy caught beside a broken lamp. "Are you going back today?" Ruth asked. "I don't know. Does Paige?" "She said she needs space." "Then give her space that isn't punishment." He nodded. "You can stay at my house," Ruth said. "The guest room is made up. I'm staying at the Hampton. That costs money. So does making you my emergency plan." Ruth leaned back. Daniel looked toward the office door. "I didn't come because I needed a place. I came because I didn't want you hearing it from Marlene." "Marlene already knows?" "No. She will in 40 minutes. 20, if Earl heard me." They both looked at the thin office wall. Earl coughed on the other side. Ruth lowered her voice. "Your marriage is not proof that I was right. I know. It is not payment for what Paige said. I know. And I will not help you turn her into the villain so you can feel clean." Daniel's face tightened. "I'm not asking you to. You came here first." He absorbed that. "I came here because I was ashamed," he said. "Not of leaving, of how long I've made both of you think the other one was the difficult person, while I quietly agreed with whoever was in front of me." That answer was painful enough to be useful. Ruth opened the office door. "Coffee?" she asked. Daniel blinked. "That's it?" "No. That is coffee." He followed her to the counter. Ruth poured him a cup and charged him $1.75. "You raised the price," he said. Fairer prices. He paid. When he reached for Walter's apron hanging by the kitchen door, Ruth shook her head. "Not today." Daniel's hand dropped. "Sit," she said. "Drink your coffee. Be somewhere without fixing it." He sat at the back table. Tessa brought him a slice of chocolate citrus cake, but made him pay for that too. The new floor acquired its first scratch 3 days later. Ruth found it near the mixer, a thin silver line across the charcoal tile. She called Luis over and pointed. He crouched. "Rack wheel. It is permanent. It's a floor. It was expensive. That doesn't make it a ceiling." Tessa rolled the rack across the mark a second time before Ruth could stop her. The wheel passed smoothly. "See?" Tessa said. "Now it has a direction." Ruth considered firing both of them. Instead, she wrote rack wheels on the maintenance list and ordered replacements. That became the shape of the following weeks. A thing went wrong, and instead of preserving the wrongness until it became tradition, they dealt with it. The front door stuck after 2 days of rain. Ruth called a carpenter. The proofing cabinet began losing heat. Luis found the worn gasket and ordered one before Ruth could tell him to kick the hinge. Tessa removed 2 cakes from the weekly menu because they consumed hours and barely paid for their boxes. Ruth put one back. They argued. Ruth removed it again. Bells stopped opening Mondays. The first Monday, Ruth woke at 2:40 out of habit, dressed, drove halfway downtown, and turned around at the courthouse. The second Monday, she made it to the bakery and found Luis changing shelf paper. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "What are you doing here? I own it. I'm being paid for maintenance." "By whom?" "You." He showed her the schedule she had signed. Ruth went home and spent the morning cleaning a kitchen that did not need it. By the fourth Monday, she slept until 6:13 and woke in a panic, Then she remembered the bakery was dark on purpose. The panic faded. The loneliness did not. She made coffee and sat at her dining table beneath Walter's visually heavy cabinet. Without the bakery waiting, the house felt too large for one body. Ruth had believed that work filled time. She began to understand it had also kept silence from becoming a person in the room. At 10, Marlene arrived without knocking and carried in a deck of cards. "I do not play gin rummy," Ruth said. "You used to." Walter cheated. Walter is not invited. They played until lunch. Marlene cheated instead. Daniel came to Belle's twice a week, always through the front door. He bought something, waited until the line cleared, and asked whether Ruth needed help. Sometimes she said no. When she said yes, he followed the task she gave him. He did not ask for the key. He and Paige remained apart. Ruth learned only what Daniel volunteered. Paige had taken over more work herself after losing the staging client. Daniel was attending counseling alone. They had dinner once and ended it before dessert. Ruth did not advise him. This required more restraint than kneading 40 pounds of dough by hand. One rainy afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the reopening, Paige entered Belle's alone. She wore jeans, a navy raincoat, and almost no makeup. Ruth had seen her without makeup before, but never without presentation. Tessa was finishing the register count. Louise had gone home. Marlene, sensing weather of a different kind, collected her purse and announced she needed to buy stamps. At 6 in the evening, Ruth asked. "The mail continues." Tessa followed her out. Paige stood near the display case. "Are you closed?" "Yes, I can come back. If you want bread, we have 1 white loaf. I don't want bread." Ruth locked the front door and turned the sign. "Coffee?" Paige looked surprised. "All right." Ruth poured 2 cups and carried them to the back table. She did not charge Paige. She noticed that too. For a moment, they listened to rain tick against the window. "The floor looks good," Paige said. "It was expensive, I imagine. You were right that it needed replacing." Paige wrapped both hands around her cup. "I've practiced what to say about 12 times, and none of the versions started with you telling me I was right. You were right about the floor, not the rest." Ruth waited. Paige looked toward the kitchen. The maple table was visible through the round window, turned 90 degrees from where it had stood for decades. "I knew the bakery was clean," she said. The admission arrived plainly, with no place to hide. "I knew you cleaned it. I knew the flour in that picture was from baking. I told myself the post was about the building, because the building does have problems. But I chose that photograph because it looked worse than the truth. Why? Because you wouldn't move. It is my property." "I know. That is not an answer." Paige's fingers tightened around the cup. "I had built the sale into everything. I was going to buy a larger stake in the staging company. Kessler's project would have given me 3 model units, maybe more. Daniel talked about the condo near us like it was decided. I started thinking of your refusal as something you were doing to me." Ruth took a sip. The coffee had gone bitter on the warmer. "And the unsanitary part?" Paige looked at her. "I wanted people to stop treating age as proof something deserved to stay. Age is not proof. No. Neither is newness. I know that now." Ruth heard the phrase Daniel had used. People always knew things now. Once knowing became less expensive than ignorance. Paige continued. "My parents' diner was filthy by the end. You never said that. They couldn't keep up. After my mother left, my father stopped cleaning anything he couldn't see. I would visit and spend hours scrubbing, while he talked about regulars who had been coming 20 years. I hated the place. I hated that everybody called it loyal and local while I was scraping grease off walls." Ruth pictured Paige at 20, perhaps younger, though Ruth refused to let the off-page past become an excuse. She pictured the camera moving beneath Belle's work table, searching for an old humiliation in a different room. "You were afraid," Ruth said. "Yes. And ambitious. Yes. And cruel." Paige's eyes filled. "Yes." The 3 answers mattered more together than anyone alone. "Daniel should not have given Kessler access," Ruth said. "He should not have returned money from your account without asking." "I know. You do not get to make him entirely guilty either." Paige gave a wet laugh. "He said you'd say that. Then he is learning." Rainwater slid down the front window, bending Main Street's lights. "Are you going to forgive me?" Paige asked. "Not tonight." Paige nodded and looked into her coffee. "Maybe not for a long time," Ruth added. "Forgiveness is not a receipt I hand you because you admitted the price. I understand." "No, you don't. Neither do I." Ruth stood and carried her cup to the counter. "What happens now?" Paige asked. "You stop using concern as a weapon. And with you, you show me who you are when nobody's watching." Paige looked around the empty bakery. "Nobody is watching now. I am." That almost made Paige smile. Ruth wrapped the last loaf and handed it to her. "I said I didn't want bread. You also said many other things." Paige accepted it. At the door, she paused. "Daniel and I might not get back together." "I know. Does that disappoint you?" "Yes." Paige looked wounded. Ruth unlocked the door. "It also may be what needs to happen. Both things can fit." After Paige left, Ruth found $2 beneath the coffee cup. She put them in the register. The week before Belle's 42nd anniversary, Tessa and Luis asked Ruth to sit at the maple table after closing. Marlene was already there with papers. "No," Ruth said. "You don't know what this is," Tessa replied. "Marlene has papers." "They are not fundraising papers," Marlene said. Luis slid a production plan across the table. It listed an anniversary menu, prep times, staffing, and an opening assignment. Ruth found her name beside 5:30 a.m. "We open at 5. "We know," Tessa said. "I arrive at 2:40, not that day." Ruth looked at Luis. "Who starts the ovens?" "I do." "Who checks the dough?" "Tessa." "Who opens the register?" "Marlene." "Who makes sure you all do those things?" The three of them looked at her. Ruth disliked the answer. Luis pushed a second paper toward her. "You asked Mr. Pritchard about profit sharing." Marlene's head snapped around. "You did? That was private. Then why are there copies?" Ruth gathered the pages. She had asked Mr. Pritchard to outline a path by which Luis and Tessa could earn small ownership shares in the bakery business over several years. Not the building, not gifts. Shares tied to work, profit, and money they could buy in gradually. Tessa touched the paper. "Is this real, if sales hold?" Luis smiled. "What does hold mean? We put a number on it." Tessa laughed softly. Ruth looked from one to the other. "You have not been here long enough." "I was here 9 years, Tessa said. "Then you left, and came back." Luis folded his hands. "You don't have to decide now. I already decided enough to call Pritchard. That is not the same as telling us." Ruth looked at the production plan again. 5:15, she said. 5:30, Tessa replied. 5:20. 5:30, all three said. Ruth glared at them. Marlene handed her a printed invitation for the anniversary. At the bottom, beneath the menu, were the words, "Ruth arrives at 5:30. We mean it." "That sounds like a threat." "It is a boundary," Marlene said. Ruth signed the production plan. On the night before the anniversary, she set her alarm for 4:45. Then she lay in the dark, wide awake, while somewhere across town, other people prepared to open Belle's bakery without her. At 4:12, Ruth turned off the alarm before it rang. She had slept perhaps 20 minutes. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Luis forgetting to check the deck oven, Tessa misreading the proofing times, and Marlene giving away the register because somebody asked politely. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed. She could leave now. Nobody would know until she arrived. She could say the alarm malfunctioned, or she had forgotten the arrangement. Age allowed a person certain dishonesties if she was willing to endure concerned looks. On the dresser, the production plan said 5:30 in Marlene's large handwriting. Ruth went downstairs. She filled the kettle, then reached past her usual cup and took Walter's green mug from the cabinet. She had moved it home during the renovation. A small chip remained beside the handle where he had struck it against the mixer one morning and blamed the mug for being reckless. Ruth washed it, though it was already clean. Coffee tasted no different from it. That was a relief. She drank at the dining table while the house slowly separated itself from darkness. Walter's chair sat opposite her. His gray sweater hung over its back, washed once, but not enough to lose the shape of neglect. At 4:51, Ruth put on lipstick. At 5:04, she left the house. The drive downtown took 7 minutes. Ruth made it last 12. She stopped fully at every empty intersection and allowed a delivery truck to turn in front of her, even though she had the right of way. When she reached Main Street, the line was already there. It began at Belle's front door, past the insurance office, and curved beneath the dead marquee of the Marlowe Theater. Earl sat near the front in his fishing chair. The radiology nurse stood behind him with her silver thermos. Alma wore her granary apron beneath a wool coat. Phil, who had objected to the price increase, held exact change in one hand. But this line felt different from the first. Nobody was holding up Paige's photographs. Nobody had arrived to rescue an old woman from an insult. They had been invited to mark 42 years, and they were waiting for the door to open because they expected breakfast. Light filled Belle's windows. Ruth parked across the street and checked the dashboard clock. 5:24. She stayed in the car. Inside, shadows moved behind the display case. Louise crossed the kitchen carrying a sheet pan. Tessa followed with a bowl. Marlene appeared at the register, looked toward Ruth's parked car, and pointed 2 fingers at her own eyes, then at the clock. Ruth considered a rude gesture and decided the anniversary photographs would preserve it forever. At 5:29, she crossed Main Street. Earl checked his watch. Cutting it close. "I own the clock." Louise opened 7 minutes early. Ruth stopped. "He what?" Earl grinned. "Made you look." She continued toward the door while the line laughed behind her. Then she saw Daniel crouch beside the bottom hinge with a screwdriver. The front door stood open 6 inches. He had removed the swollen wooden edge in a thin curl and was testing the swing. "What are you doing?" Ruth asked. He looked up. "Marlene called me." Ruth turned toward the register. Marlene mouthed, "It's stuck." Daniel stood. He wore work clothes and no apron. "I can stop," he said. "Does it close?" He pushed the door. It moved smoothly into the frame, then opened without the old shoulder shove. "Yes." "Then finish." He tightened the hinge screws. He did not suggest replacing the door, changing the lock, or installing anything Ruth had not asked for. When he stood again, Ruth took the brass key from her coat pocket. Daniel looked at it, but did not reach. "For emergencies," she said, "only with permission. That is what emergency means." "I know." She placed the key in his palm. Daniel closed his fingers around it. "Thank you. Don't make me regret it. I probably will eventually." The answer was honest enough to make her smile. Inside, the bakery smelled of butter, yeast, cinnamon, and coffee strong enough to qualify as coffee. The charcoal floor had been swept. The maple table was covered with trays of proof twists. White bread cooled on racks. Tessa's chocolate citrus cake stood in the display case beneath a card reading, "Seasonal, not European." Everything was working, without Ruth. The old fear arrived before pride could stop it. It moved through her cold and precise. The ovens were hot. The register was counted. The doors had opened. People she had trained and people she had hired had taken the dark hours she once believed proved her worth and completed them without needing rescue. Ruth stood beside old Ironsides with her coat still on. Louise came from the oven carrying a tray of Parker House rolls. Their tops shone with butter. "You're late," he said. "It is 5:29. You usually arrive yesterday." He set the tray on the maple table and tore one roll open. Steam rose between his fingers. "Taste." "Why?" "Because I changed the milk ratio." "You changed my formula on the anniversary?" "I adjusted it." "Without asking." "I wrote it on the production sheet." "At the bottom." "You signed the sheet." Ruth took the piece he offered. The crumb was softer than usual, the flavor fuller without becoming sweet. She chewed slowly while Louise watched. "Well?" he asked. "It needs salt." His face fell. Tessa looked up from the cake. Ruth took another bite. That was a joke. Louise closed his eyes. "You need a different face." The laugh that followed reached the front room. Customers began tapping on the window, though opening time was still 30 seconds away. Marlene unlocked the door at exactly 5:30. The line entered. Earl wiped his boots with ceremonial care and bought 6 rolls. Ruth allowed it because 3 were for his sister, though she made him swear the sister existed. The radiology nurse purchased the first slice of chocolate citrus cake and ate it at the counter before her shift. Alma collected 2 trays for the granary and paid the invoice without inspecting a single roll. At 6:15, Paige came through the door. She had joined the line near the theater and waited like everyone else. Her hair was damp from the mist. She offered no explanation for being there. Daniel was folding boxes at the end of the counter. He looked up. Paige looked at him. Neither approached the other. Ruth watched them choose not to turn the room into their marriage. When Paige reached the register, Tessa asked what she wanted. 1 white loaf, Paige said, and 4 sour cream twists. 4? Ruth asked. Paige glanced at her. 2 are for a client. A local client? Yes. One who knows where they came from? Yes, Ruth. It was not a grand apology. It was 4 twists in a white paper bag, sold under Belle's name. Paige paid the higher price without comment. Before leaving, she stopped near the kitchen door and looked through the round window at the new floor, the repaired sink, and the maple table in its new position. It looks good, she said. It works better. That too. Paige looked at Daniel. Coffee Tuesday? He nodded. Coffee, they did not touch. She left with the loaf and twists. Daniel resumed folding boxes. The next box came out square. At 7, the display cases were half empty. At 8, the anniversary cake had sold down to crumbs and one badly cut corner. At 8:30, Tessa replaced the sold-out sign with a new one Ruth had approved. Limited menu today. Back tomorrow. Nobody had to be saved. Nobody had to be defeated. They simply had to make enough and stop when enough was gone. Near 9, a man Ruth did not recognize asked whether Belle's would open a second location. No, Ruth said. Tessa, standing beside her, said, Not this week. Ruth turned. Tessa smiled innocently. We are not opening another location. I didn't say we were. You suggested possibility. I preserve mystery. Preserve fruit. Leave the future alone. Louise passed behind them carrying a flour bin. We could wholesale the seasonal cake. Ruth pointed at both of them. This is how businesses fail. One good morning and everyone develops a map. Tessa's smile softened. Then, we don't make a map without you. Ruth heard the emphasis. She looked at the nearly empty display case. Granary gets 2 cakes a week, no more until we see the numbers. Tessa wrote it down before Ruth could reconsider. The final customer left at 9:17. Marlene locked the door and turned the sign. Daniel began gathering cups from the tables. Ruth sat at the maple table. Her feet hurt. Her thumb ached. Butter had spotted the front of her anniversary blouse. She had worked less than 4 hours and felt no shame about any of it. Louise placed the profit-sharing papers in front of her. Today? Ruth asked. You picked today, he said. I called Pritchard. I did not schedule a ceremony. Good, Tessa said. I hate ceremonies. Marlene pulled a bottle of sparkling cider from beneath the counter. Ruth stared at her. It was on sale. They reviewed every page. The arrangement did not hand Belle's away. Louise and Tessa would receive modest quarterly profit shares after the trial period. They could buy small ownership stakes over time if the bakery met agreed targets and if all 3 approved. The building remained Ruth's. Major decisions required more than enthusiasm and a napkin. Louise requested language protecting the 2 consecutive days he needed for Cleveland. Tessa asked that recipes she developed be credited in the bakery records, even if sold under Belle's name. Ruth agreed to both. What do you want? Tessa asked her. It is written there. No. For yourself. Ruth looked toward the kitchen. The ovens were cooling. Old Ironsides stood clean. Walter's green mug rested beside the sink where Ruth had carried it after leaving home. 2 mornings off, she said. Louise nodded. Mondays and? Wednesday. Every Wednesday, Marlene asked. Do not make it sound fatal. Tessa wrote it into the schedule. They signed. Marlene opened the cider, and the cork struck the pressed tin ceiling. Everyone looked up. No dent, Daniel said. Then pour, Ruth replied. They drank from coffee cups because Belle's did not own champagne glasses. Tessa raised hers. To 42 years. Louise added, and fairer prices, Marlene said. And asking permission. Daniel looked at Ruth. Definitely that. Ruth lifted Walter's green mug. 2 enough, she said. They drank. Afterward, Louise took the mixing bowls. Tessa wiped the maple table. Marlene counted the register, while Daniel checked the front door one more time and left it alone when it closed properly. Ruth carried nothing. At the back door, she paused with her coat over one arm. Who starts the ovens Wednesday? She asked. I do, Louise said. Who checks the dough? I do, Tessa replied. Who makes sure Marlene doesn't accept a fundraiser? Marlene looked offended. I have grown like mold. Go home, Ruth. Ruth stepped into the alley. For 41 years, leaving before everyone else would have felt like failure. Now the bakery continued behind her, in the ordinary sounds of people finishing work. Water running, trays stacking, Louise complaining that Tessa had put a scraper on the wrong hook. Ruth walked to her car without turning back. At the corner, the red script on Belle's front window caught the morning light. Behind it, the people she had chosen moved through the kitchen she had kept, changed, and finally shared. The ovens were still warm. They no longer needed her exhaustion to stay that way.